Before we jump in, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. It seriously helps the channel grow. All right, let's get started.
During an expedition into mysterious ancient ruins, Luffy suddenly vanishes, leaving the Straw Hats frantic and desperate to find him. Instead of answers, they're pulled into something far more unsettling: Luffy's own memories. Trapped in the past with no clear way out, the crew is forced to relive moments from Luffy's childhood, moments he never shared and never planned for them to see. As they witness his early life, his bond with Ace, and the pain and loneliness hidden behind his usual grin, the Straw Hats come face to face with the emotional scars that shaped their captain. The journey becomes less about rescue and more about understanding, as each memory challenges how they see Luffy and their role in his life. Blending friendship, hurt, comfort, and deep emotional introspection, this long, heartfelt fic explores brotherhood, trauma, and unconditional loyalty, showing that some memories are buried not because they're forgotten, but because they hurt too much to share. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Daughter of the Sea by Kuchiachi.
Chapter 17, Recipe for Disaster and Zoro's Vow. So that's Mihawk? Brook asked softly as they all watched the foreboding boat draw ever nearer to them, the Krieg pirates all cowering away from the sight of it, staring with expressions of the utmost terror. He's the one who destroyed Krieg's armada by himself. Yeah, and he just tore up the flagship a few minutes ago, Frankie said with an unusually soft voice, moving his sunglasses up so that he could get a better look at him. Even Robin felt a little intimidated when she saw those merciless, yellow eyes. Though it was only the first time she had seen his strength firsthand, but seeing just a little display of his power was enough to send a few chills through her. With little effort he was able to slice that enormous ship in several pieces as if it was butter. Zoro, Chopper said, glancing over at the past version of their Zoro. You look a little freaked out. Yeah, Usopp agreed, seeing the wide eyes and sweat run down his face. He couldn't ever remember seeing him so petrified. That's new. The current Zoro rolled his eye as he looked away. Yeah, he could see that his past was plainly startled by seeing his rival for the first time. Though, now that he thought about it, he was hardly what you called Mihawk's rival, more like a stepping stone to him. You monster. One of the Krieg pirates yelled in a trembling voice, why are you doing this to us? What the hell did we ever do to you? Mihawk glanced up at him in uninterested a way, as if speaking was a waste of energy, just killing time. Of course he was, Zoro sighed, knowing that Mihawk sometimes felt the need to slice something up when he had nothing better to do. You mean he did all that just because he was bored? Nami cried out with a gulp, sweat on her forehead as she stared at him. And here I thought you were a monster, Zoro. I am, but Mihawk's in a class all his own, Zoro confessed. Bastard, another pirate cried out as he pulled out a pair of pistols and shot at him. But with the grace of a swan, he handled his sword in such a way that Zoro knew it couldn't harm even a baby, but he twisted his wrist very slightly, and just like that the two bullets were deflected and their courses were changed. Everyone stared at him. That was amazing, but terrifying, Nami said softly. He barely moved but he managed to stop bullets without even trying. Such grace and speed, Brook said in hushed tones. If I still had eyes I wouldn't believe them. That sword must weigh a great deal, but it's like he's swinging around a feather. Now I truly see why he is known as the best. Yes, Robin said with a slight nod. Hawkeye, or his real name Dracula, Mihawk is truly a master of the sword and known throughout the world as the best. And from what he did to that ship, I think we can all understand how he earned the reputation. What, I missed. The pirate cried out, not believing it, but I aimed straight for him. He diverted it, said Zoro's voice, and for a moment the Straw Hats thought it was their Zoro, but the past version of him was suddenly there, appearing behind the pirate and making him jump. He changed the course of the bullet with the tip of his sword. That can't be, he said in disbelief as past Zoro coolly walked past them all, one hand on his swords, which caught the attention of the other pirates as the first demanded to know who Zoro was. He's got 3 swords. It couldn't be. Another pirate gasped, looking up to his face. But that Zoro didn't pay them any attention as he turned his full attention to Hawkeye. I've never seen a sword handled so gently or with such grace, he said truthfully. And that is still true, present-day Zoro confirmed as he watched. That should have been his first hint that he was out of his league. Hawkeye's eyes looked over at him without even turning his head as he casually replied, there is no strength in swordplay based on force. The current Zoro continued to watch unblinkingly. Only now did he really see just how true that was. Even with all the strength in the world, you can still be easily defeated if you didn't know how to use it properly. He learned that the hard way. Did you also use that sword to slice up this ship? His past self continued on, though it was clear from the wild, excited look on his face that he already knew the answer. I did, Mihawk answered, as if telling him that what he did was something that anyone could do. Then it's true, he asked, still looking like a child who was promised a big treat. You're the best. Present-day Zoro nodded once again. Mihawk was the best, but he won't be for much longer. He felt his hand go to Watto at his hip and he felt his resolve to beat him someday strengthen. Zoro-san, asked Brook softly, not liking where this conversation was going even if it already happened. Just what were you gonna do? Yeah, Chopper gulped, I don't like that look in your eyes. His past self spoke again as he went to his black bandana and untied it from his arm. I set sail for only one reason. To meet you. And what is your goal? Mihawk asked with only a slight trace of curiosity in his tone. To beat you, exclaimed Zoro, still grinning wildly as he tied his bandana on. Mihawk smirked at him, how foolish. I have to agree, Robin answered as she looked to the Zoro next to her. You must have been able to sense how strong he was. Why did you choose to fight him here and now when you were clearly unmatched? Because I wouldn't have been able to live with myself if I did something like that, Zoro answered her truthfully, his one eye never leaving the scene. I set out for the sole purpose of meeting and defeating him. It's true that I met him much sooner than I had originally thought, but I just couldn't turn my back on it. Even if it meant getting killed. Asked Frankie incredulously. You had a lot of balls taking on this guy after seeing what he could do. He just shrugged as his past self pulled out the white blade and declared, you got spare time. So let's do this. The Krieg pirates, as well as all the cooks, all suddenly realized who Zoro was. It's funny, Usopp said, looking around at them all they have to see is you with 3 swords and they know right away who you are. How many other people carry around 3 katana? Zoro asked with a grin. Don Krieg was watching the two with great interest. Really? It's the pirate hunter, he said gruffly, though they were still standing on the Barate's edge with the memory version of Sanji, they heard what he just said and Sanji was stunned by that. Scared of me crud cook? Zoro smirked as Sanji glared at him with his one revealed eye narrowed dangerously. I just didn't expect to see a pirate hunter on board a pirate ship, he hissed, now shut up. I'm looking forward to seeing you get your ass kicked again. Veins standing out on his head, Zoro shot a dagger-like glare right back at him. You mean you fought Mihawk and lost, Zoro-san? Brook cried out in surprise. But then, how come you aren't dead? Robin finished asking for him in curiosity. It's not important Animro. He yelled at them. Just then, past Usopp was yelling at Luffy, telling him that they had to hurry or else they would lose sight of Nami and the Going Merry. But surprisingly, Luffy didn't even look at him as he watched Zoro and Mihawk size each other up. Or rather, Zoro sized Mihawk up, Hawkeye didn't even seem troubled. A fight? Mihawk asked him, with a tone that clearly said that he wanted to make sure that he heard right. You're a weak, pitiful creature. Ouch, Frankie winced, that must have hurt. The present-day Zoro folded his arms as he thought to himself. That had been the first time since Kuina that someone had called him weak, and get away with it. Sure, he was known as the strongest swordsman in the East Blue, but that wasn't saying much compared to the rest of the world. His past self however was angered by Mihawk's words, but he did his best to hide it. He wasn't going to let Mihawk go without a duel. If you blinked, you would have suddenly thought that Mihawk teleported over to face Zoro. But the Straw Hats, who were able to keep up, saw the graceful leap from the boat to the remains of what had once been a ship. If you are, in fact, a competent swordsman, Mihawk said in a skeptic tone as if he highly doubted it, you should see the disparity in our abilities before we even cross swords. Did you know? Usopp asked, a little afraid that he had asked such a daring question. Zoro didn't say anything for a moment as he watched them. Yes, and no. I had strong senses in these days, but nothing like true hockey so I couldn't really sense just how far apart we were in skill level. I must ask you, why have you challenged me? Hawkeye went on, could it be your courage? Or, is it simply your ignorance? More like a lifelong mission, present-day Zoro said, looking forward to the day that he beat that cocky bastard. His past self was grinning as he declared that it was his ambition that drove him to fight. And as he took out his swords he added, also I made a promise I intend to keep. That got everyone's attention and they all glanced back at him. A promise? Usopp repeated, sounding lost. What promise were you talking about? Not that it's any of your business, Zoro responded darkly, but I made a promise to someone a long time ago that I would one day be the best. What happened between him and Kuina was private. He didn't want to have to explain that he had sworn an oath with her that they would race to become the best. It was just like Luffy's promise with Ace after they lost their brother, and once again he felt shame flood through him at seeing such an important and personal memory. There isn't a person alive who can beat Big Bro. Yosaku yelled from the boat as he and Johnny began cheering. He's already the best in the world. Hardly, Zoro said, but he was touched by their confidence. It's too bad that he let everyone down here when he did get his ass handed to him. But what really got him was the fact that Luffy was just watching with that same look on his face, like he knew how this would all end.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, Hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
But, then again, he supposed that it was clear from the start how this fight would end. Looking hard, he could see that Luffy was oddly calm and collective here, but Zoro knew him well enough by now to tell that he was also really upset by this whole situation. It was clear to him that Luffy wanted to put a stop to all of this, but he kept his mouth shut and he knew why. He knew that Luffy was honoring the promise he made to him about not standing in his way. At the same time, Mihawk took the little golden cross that was around his neck and revealed that it was actually hiding a short knife that looked more like for cutting someone's toenails than fighting. Zoro's past self had already narrowed his eyes, realizing that he was being mocked when Mihawk held up the knife. "Funny, what do you think you're gonna do with that?" he demanded. "It'll be more than enough, after all you wouldn't kill a fly with a cannon, would you?" Mihawk asked him coolly. "You may have quite the reputation in the East Blue. But that doesn't mean much to me. This sea is by far the weakest of the four." He sighed a little before he said that he didn't carry any blades that were smaller than this, and it was like he was apologizing to him that this knife was too big for him to handle. "He's cold," Nami said nervously, knowing that there was no way that Zoro was going to take that lying down. "He was trying to make you angry, Zoro," Robin offered to him softly. "Make you reckless and short-tempered." "I know," he answered. At least, now he did. His past self was clearly showing anger at those words. "I've had just enough of your attitude." He snarled and he actually bit down on the sword with such force that he ended up chipping off a piece of tooth. But he didn't care as he charged at him recklessly. "Now you die. You have no idea how big the world really is," Mihawk said almost forebodingly as he held up the little knife. "Onigiri," Zoro yelled as he struck, but to everyone's amazement, Hawkeye didn't just catch the attack, but he stopped all three swords dead in mid-strike. "He stopped you that easily?" Brook cried out in shock. He remembered seeing Zoro fight back on Thriller Bark when he took on Ryuma and got his shadow back for him. He had never seen anyone so strong before, but here, it was nothing to Mihawk. Nami and Usopp both choked on their breath. Even though Usopp had already seen this and knew what happened, it was still hard to believe that a monster like Zoro could have been stopped so easily. What the memory, Zoro gasped when he tried to move forward, but nothing budged. "Zoro!" Luffy yelled worriedly from where he stood, but didn't do anything else as he could only stand by and watch. "What?" Big Bro's Onigiri was stopped. Johnny yelled incredulously. "But that's crazy." Yosaku shouted, also in disbelief, that attacks never fails to stop an enemy. "What's going on here? You normally wouldn't believe it if you don't see it with your own eyes," Robin stated causally as she looked to their Zoro, who was looking deeply annoyed at what he was seeing. "But I think you look a little shocked here as well." He didn't answer her as he watched. The truth was, he had been pushing hard against that knife, but Mihawk hadn't budged an inch. He could feel that strength and power behind all that, even with a pocket knife, and that frightened him. His past self was just realizing that as well as he fought, his eyes wide, not believing what was happening. Finally, either through a sudden burst of strength, or Mihawk simply grew bored, he broke free. "I am not that far behind the world's strongest," he yelled as he attacked again, but this time no longer as calm or collective as he usually was in battle. It was here that they could fully see that Mihawk shook Zoro to the core. He now began to swing at Hawkeye viciously with his swords. But Mihawk barely had to defend himself as he parried each swing or merely stepped lightly out of the way, so he didn't even get a scratch on him. "Zoro!" Chopper croaked as he watched his hero slowly break down and resort to just swinging the swords around like a madman. I've never seen you so." He couldn't even find the words to describe how he was feeling as he watched. "I know," Zoro answered him as memory Zoro threw caution to the wind and just started swinging the swords around wildly, no longer caring if he hit anything at all. "But, I wasn't intending to leave that fight as anything but the winner. You're just waving the swords around, that's hardly swordsmanship," Brook whispered as Mihawk stepped to the side and caused Zoro to fall to the deck, panting hard. "You're just toying with him, right?" Yosaku screamed, his eyes wide. "Fight for real, big bro." "Big bro," added Johnny, sounding close to openly sobbing. But it was clear from the look on past Zoro's face that he was past listening. "You can't be that much better than me," he yelled, shaking with rage, and seeing the expressionless look on Mihawk's face just seemed to even angrier. Again, he got up and began to violently attack. There was no skill or plan here, just vicious slashes. Present-day Zoro was watching with a sense of humiliation. It was as if he were still that kid who had never held a bamboo sword before and was fighting Kuina for the first time. And like then, he knew that it would end the same way. Using the dagger to block another attack, Mihawk stated, "Such ferocious swordplay." Zoro sighed as he wholeheartedly agreed with him. He wasn't thinking anymore, he was giving in to his anger. He felt Luffy move beside him and glanced back to see the angry look on his face. He knew that Luffy wanted to call him to stop fighting, but he stayed put. Using his mouth, his past self moved his sword up to strike, but Hawkeye stopped it, creating a shockwave from the strength that both swordsmen created. How can he defend against Zoro's three-sword style with such a small knife? One of the Krieg pirate yelled in astonishment. He's even more of a monster with a blade than even the great Zoro. Another cried. The swings were so quick that all they could see were flashes of light. As Zoro lunged forward, Mihawk moved and then hit the back of Zoro's neck with the side of his hand. They watched Zoro's eyes roll into the back of his head and they knew that he was fighting to stay conscious after an attack like that. Present-day Zoro rubbed the back of his own neck. Even without a sword, that man was dangerous. This is a nightmare. You don't stand a chance. Chopper screamed, terrified. And this is who you have to beat to become the best. It's hardly a surprise, Robin answered, watching Memory Zoro lay on the deck, trying to catch his breath. After all, he didn't become the best for nothing. It's like he's bored, Frankie pointed out, looking at Hawkeye's uninterested expression. I get it, Zoro snapped. This was like putting salt in an old wound. It wasn't something he was proud of or liked to be reminded of. Not that he could ever forget. He looked down to see the familiar jagged scar across his chest. He was forever reminded of that day, a permanent lesson on his own skin. But he had to admire his past self's dedication. He was already getting back up, though now dazed from that last attack. He was exhausted as he marched forward, trying again, but he was so slow and worn out that even a weak swordsman could have easily stepped out of the way. With nothing to hit, he fell forward again, gasping for air as he lay there, with Mihawk looking down at him, but there was something different in his gaze this time. Curiosity perhaps. What is it then? Mihawk suddenly asked, what weight do you carry upon your shoulders? Speak up, weakling. I didn't think that there was anyone who could call you weak like that, Nami whispered to him. She had never seen Zoro as helpless as he was here. Even when he was fighting Arlong, trying to buy time for Sanji to get Luffy out of the sea, and a serious wound had opened up, at least then, however, he stood a chance. Johnny and Yosaku were both ready to defend Zoro for that insult. How dare you call him weakling? Yosaku cried, his hand on his sword, you'll pay for that. We'll teach you a lesson. Johnny added, and with screams they jumped, ready to get in the fight, but Luffy wouldn't allow it. No, he yelled, stretching his arms out to grab them by the scruffs of their necks. Yosaku, Johnny, get back here. He then held them both down as he commanded, just stay put. But Luffy was clearly just as upset as they were about it. Even Memory Usopp noticed it as he glanced over at him. Luffy, he began, but past Zoro was up on his feet. He was still looking angry, although it was clear that he was far from giving up. No, I won't lose. He declared, I refuse to be defeated. Zoro, stop it. Chopper screamed out fearfully, turning back to their Zoro, you could get yourself killed here. I didn't care, was his only answer, and Chopper's eyes widened. If I had to turn away from my dream like this, I could never have forgiven myself. And Kuina never would have either, he added in thought. Mihawk didn't say a word as he watched him cross his three blades. Tiger. Present-day Zoro could clearly remember this moment. This was where he could hear his own heart beating as the rest of the world faded away. It was as if he had grown deaf to everything except for the pounding in his ears of his own heartbeat. He also remembered the words that had come back to him at this moment, world's greatest swordsman, huh? Sounds pretty good. The king of the pirates wouldn't have anything less than the best on his crew. Why had he suddenly thought about what Luffy said? But his past self had barely finished finishing the attack when Mihawk rushed forward and impaled him with the small blade, just right above his heart. Chopper screamed, and everyone cringed at that. Even Usopp had shivers at seeing that all over again. The only one of them who hadn't reacted at all was Robin as she watched. What were you thinking? Chopper screamed at him, tears in his eyes. Don't you know how close you were to getting stabbed in the heart? He wasn't gonna kill me, he answered back coolly. And he knew that was true. Mihawk wanted him to at least answer his question before he killed him. Having such master control over a blade, he knew that Hawkeye could have easily have gutted him like a fish, but the fact that he was still breathing proved that he held back until he got a chance to speak to him again. You are defeated, yet won't step back. Why not? Mihawk asked, as if wondering what he would do now. I don't know, past Zoro answered honestly as blood trailed from his mouth and ran down the side of his face to stain his shirt. But, I will not run. Even if I retreat a single step, I'd be shattering the promises I made. I can't run. I would lose my honor. You see, without that there'd be nothing left for me here. You sound just like Ace here, Nami snapped at him, remembering Ace's bad habit of never running away. Maybe, Zoro stated absent-mindedly to her, but it wasn't because I had a death wish, I promise you that. That's what defeat is, Mihawk stated simply. But past Zoro merely answered, then I won't accept defeat. Then you die, Mihawk pointed out coldly. Looking at him dead in the eyes, he said without a trace of hesitation or regret in his voice, I rather die than give up. Zoro, Chopper whispered, tears back in his eyes, filled with both admiration and frustration for Zoro. Are you crazy, bro? How can you get anywhere if you're dead? Frankie yelled at him. I couldn't do it, he answered them again. If I moved to retreat, if I took a single step back, everything that has made me who I am today, they'll all shatter and vanish into thin air. I said it before, I couldn't run even if I wanted to. You really are insane, aren't you? Usopp hollered. Hawkeye on the other hand was giving him a new look of respect as he pulled his knife out of his chest. He stepped back and resheathed it before he demanded Zoro's name. Moving his swords into an almost triangle shape, he proclaimed, "I am Roronoa Zoro."
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
Mihawk reached behind his head to grab his black sword. "I'll remember it," he informed him. "No one as strong as you has come around in quite some time. But you were hardly standing up." What did he mean by strong? Usopp asked confused. "He didn't mean strength-wise," Sanji answered, looking over at Cactus Head, fully understanding just what Mihawk meant. So as a swordsman courtesy, Mihawk finished, showing off the bright gleam of the sword as he brought it swinging around. "I'll use the world's strongest black sword to defeat you." "Thank you. I appreciate it," Zoro said as Johnny and Yosaku pleaded for him to stop, which he naturally ignored. Current Zoro knew that was the highest respect that he could ever hope to gain from Mihawk. The world's greatest was so impressed by his stubbornness that he gave him a face-off against the black sword. Here it was either the world's strongest, or death. Spinning his swords, Zoro was ready to perform the strongest attack he knew back then. Mihawk charged. At first no one could see what happened, it looked as though Hawkeye merely ran past him, the two froze where they stood, and then... "Your swords!" Brook cried out as the two katanas in Zoro's hands suddenly shattered into pieces. Only the white sword in his mouth remained as Zoro fell to his knees in defeat. The Straw Hats couldn't believe it, they had never seen him lose in such a way, it wasn't even close. Current Zoro lowered his head softly. This ended in his utter defeat. Without saying a word, his past self carefully put his last sword back in its sheath as Mihawk raised his blade up, to finish him off. But before he could finish the attack, Zoro spun around and stood up, his arms wide, and his white sword still in one hand. "What do you think you're doing?" Nami yelled at him. "I may have lost but I never run," Zoro responded to her casually. Even Mihawk looked startled at that and asked him why as well. Raising his head so that they could see the dark smile on his face, he answered simply, "Scars on the back are a swordsman's shame." "Which is true," Zoro said proudly, knowing that there wasn't a single scar on his back, and that had to be one of his greatest prides. Hawkeye returned the grin. "Fine," he answered. And with a single slash, he cleaved open a massive diagonal cut across Zoro's entire chest. For a second there wasn't anything, but then blood cascaded out so that the Straw Hats all felt green at the sight of it. Unable to stand any longer, Zoro's body slowly fell backwards to the sea. "Zoro!" Luffy screamed in horror. "You shouldn't rush these things, young man," Mihawk informed him coolly as Zoro's body fell. "Zoro!" Past Usopp screamed out, unable to believe what he was seeing. "Big bro!" Both Johnny and Yosaku yelled, a fountain of tears falling from their eyes. "How could you live through that?" Brook gasped out, watching the blood splatter the wooden waves around him. Memory Zoro's eyes were blank as they shut, he had accepted his fate to die here if that was what was to happen. Chopper was screaming in shock, jumping up to run over to him, but Robin held him back. "There's nothing you can do," she whispered softly, knowing that this wasn't what he wanted to hear, but it was the truth. "I didn't die, remember?" Zoro reminded them all irritably. Truth was he hardly felt the attack that day, it all happened so quickly that it wasn't until he came to in the boat did he really feel the true impact of the blow. "Don't you get it?" Chopper demanded, sounding close to screaming. "That's the same sword he used to destroy that ship. And you let him cut you." "I thought that it was bad the first time," Usopp whispered, shivering as the white sword slipped out of Zoro's hand and hit the water. "No," Luffy screamed, tears also appearing in his eyes as he gripped the side of the boat so tightly that it looked as if he would break it into pieces. Suddenly another voice sounded from right next to them. "Don't be stupid." Memory Sanji screamed out just as Zoro fell into the sea. "Give up your ambitions and live." "I thought you were insane," the current Sanji admitted to him, still breathing hard on the cigarette. "Your opponent was way out of your league. How this fight would end was clear from the start, why choose death?" "Because if I ran from this," he answered him harshly, "I'd be turning my back on everything I was. I couldn't do that. If dying by Mihawk's hands was to be my fate, I embrace it without a second thought." "You didn't care," Chopper demanded. "Well, he didn't die," Sanji stated casually, but he was still looking at his past self. He could hardly believe that this was him. Did he really say that? Looking at who he was now, he knew that he wouldn't be saying something like that now. Shame, isn't it? He added with a little smirk at Zoro. "Dream on," Zoro said, rolling his eye, "or get real. Either way, I wasn't gonna die here like this." "Only because Hawkeye was impressed of your thick head," Sanji reminded him. "He could have got you without even thinking about it." Luffy was shaking from where he stood. "Damn you," he growled out, unable to sit still anymore. Stretching his arm out to the ship, he rocketed himself over to deal with Mihawk himself just as Johnny and Yosaku jumped in after Zoro. Seeing his powers for the first time, everyone was freaked out as they watched. Even memory version Sanji had dropped the cigarette from his mouth. It looked as though Luffy was gonna slam into Mihawk as he came flying right at him, but he moved out of the way just in time so that Luffy crashed into the side of the wreckage. "Are you that young warrior's comrade?" Mihawk questioned calmly when Luffy got his head stuck and was now attempting to pull it out. "I'm impressed with you for not interfering." "Yes, not many people can do that when their friends are in trouble," Brook added softly as Luffy managed to pull his head out and fell on his back. "There's nothing to be upset about," Hawkeye informed him calmly, "your friend will live." Frankie, who had been sniffling a little, shook his head. "Looks like we owe him one." Zoro looked away, hating the fact that he owed Mihawk a great deal, not just for sparing his life, but for training him for the last 2 years. At his word however, Luffy sat bolt upright at once and turned around to see that Johnny and Yosaku had already pulled him out. "Big bro, say something please," Yosaku begged as Zoro hung over their shoulders lifelessly for a moment. "Zoro," Luffy exclaimed anxiously. At hearing his name, the memory Zoro suddenly came back to life and began to cough up water and blood. "Zoro," Luffy called back again worriedly as the two dragged Zoro back to their boat where Usopp was waiting for them. Together, they pulled him on board and Usopp went to get some medicine for him. "I'm amazed that you survived that," Nami whispered, thinking of when that wound reopened back against Hachi and Arlong. Now she fully understood where he had received such a serious wound. "It's still far too early for you to die," Mihawk said as he folded his arms and proclaimed loudly. "My name is Hawkeye Mihawk. You're strong, but there is still much for you to learn. No matter how many years it takes, I will hold this title as the greatest in the world and wait for you. Until that day you must hone your skills. Then, seek me out. Roronoa Zoro." Present-day Zoro smiled at that. Well, he may not have won the fight, he still earned Mihawk's respect and that was a win in his book. "Wow," Brooks said softly. This was amazing to see. Zoro followed his dream, and though it almost cost him his life, he still ended up earning the greatest swordsman's respect and even a challenge to come back one day. Chef Zeph had stood there the whole time with that composed expression. "Not just anyone can earn the regards of Hawkeye Mihawk," he said, and there was also a tone of respect in his voice. "Yeah, and all it cost him was a 3-foot scar and all that blood," Nami shivered, looking back to the swordsman. "You were really crazy, you know that right?" Zoro shrugged, not really caring what she said as he continued to watch Mihawk turning to Luffy and asking him what his one goal was. Without any emotion in his face, Luffy answered with as little hesitation as Zoro showed, "To be the king." Again, Mihawk smiled. "Your ambitions are even loftier than your friends," he informed him. "That's quite the task." Current Zoro smirked. "Yes, that dream was even more challenging than surpassing Mihawk." "Yeah, well you just let me worry about that," Luffy said defiantly, and even stuck his tongue out at him, letting him know just what he thought about that. "He's alive," Usopp's voice suddenly called out and they all looked to the boat. "He was just unconsciousness," he declared as Zoro continued to cough up blood and seawater. Johnny and Yosaku were trying to get him to say something as Luffy called out his name worriedly. Gasping for breath, Zoro proved that he was far from dead as he lifted his white katana into the air, the sun gleaming on the silver blade. "Luffy, can you hear me?" he gasped out so hoarsely that they could hardly make out the words. "Yeah," Luffy shouted, and they were all wondering just what he was gonna say. "You shouldn't try to talk with that injury." Chopper screamed out, "You need to save your energy." "Shut up," Zoro said in annoyance. "There are some things that I needed to say." And what he said next got robbed them all of breath. "I'm sorry for disappointing you," his past self gasped out, breathing hard as if every word was painful. "I know you need nothing less than the greatest swordsman in the world." Luffy's eyes widened and he stood there, completely taken aback by what Zoro was saying. "I've let you down, please forgive me." "Why were you apologizing?" Robin asked him, though she already had a good guess to what it was about. "Because he let me ignore his command and fight for my dream," he answered truthfully. "Ignore his order?" Chopper asked in confusion. "He told me to go after Nami here," he reminded them as he jerked his thumb at her. "Not sure why he would, but as soon as Mihawk appeared, he let me stay and fight. He didn't interfere with us and even kept others from stepping in. He did it all to let me have a chance at fighting him. I owed this much to him. Besides, a captain's order was law and he completely went against his words. He was truly grateful that Luffy gave him the chance and he was letting him know that it was worth it." "But," Nami said, not really understanding it, but Sanji put a hand on her shoulder and shook his head. "It's something that he needed to say," he explained. "It's all right." Zoro's past self was suddenly coughing up more blood and water as the three around him tried to get him to stop. But he kept going on, ignoring their advice as he declared for them all to hear, "I solemnly swear, from this moment forward, that I will never lose again." And to their amazement, he was sounding choked up, like he was crying. "You were," Chopper whispered. "Not a word," Zoro told him darkly and the reindeer shut up at once. "Until the day comes," he went on, struggling for air, "when I defeat him and take his title." Mihawk smirked at that, as if he was privately looking forward to seeing him try. But then Zoro finally called out, "I will never be defeated. Is that okay, King of the Pirates?" There was silence at that and a huge smile spread over Luffy's face. Yep. That was all he said, but there was something said between Captain and Swordsman that the others were having trouble figuring out the words. But present-day Zoro knew what it was. It wasn't just because of Mihawk's skill did he lose that day. He lost that day because Mihawk knew something he didn't. It was true, he learned a hard lesson that day that he never wanted to learn. He didn't understanding it then, but it changed him, and how he looked at the sword. He had to take a good, hard look at himself from the outside and admit that he was weak. And facing up to that wasn't easy. That one defeat he learned more from than from any of his victories. He learned that day that in order to improve, you need to accept the fact that you're not the best, but still have the will to strive to be better than anyone you face. Mihawk seemed pleased also as he turned and headed back to his boat. You're a good team. I hope to see you again, someday. He's a very confusing man, Brook said softly, tilting his head a little at Mihawk's retreating back. It was almost as if he had something planned for Zoro. Hey, Hawkeye! Krieg yelled, jumping down to face him. I forgot about that loser, Frankie said, now wondering just what he wanted. I was under the impression that you had come here to take my life, he said, sounding insulted. Weren't you here to kill Don Krieg, ruler of the East Blue? If he was, shouldn't he be happy that he's leaving? Nami asked, exasperated. Does he have a death wish? Yeah, he saw what he did to Zoro, didn't he? Usopp said, still not sure to what had been going on in Krieg's mind when challenged him. The thought had crossed my mind, Hawkeye admitted, not even bothering to look at him, but I've had enough fun for today, so I'm going home to get some rest. Krieg cracked his neck as he said with a grin, I don't care if you've had enough, I haven't even gotten started. Again, if he couldn't fight him out on the Grand Line, what makes him think he can fight him here? Robin sighed, knowing that this is what overconfidence does to someone, makes them cocky and careless. As Krieg's crew begged him to change his mind, Krieg suddenly revealed guns and miniature cannons from underneath his armor and attacked. He just won't learn, will he? Mihawk asked in a bored way as his hand went back to his sword. No one could see what happened to him, but when the smoke from the projectiles cleared, Mihawk was gone. Luffy had stretched over and was hanging onto the Baratie, and the rest of the crew was on the tiny boat. Usopp! Luffy cried out, towards everyone on the boat, go on ahead. I'll leave Nami to you. Roger that. Past Usopp cried back, waving the straw hat around, don't you worry about a thing. Zoro and I are gonna get her right back. Make sure you get the cook to join our crew. And then, he grinned wider as he threw the hat to him, the five of us will set sail to the Grand Line. I'm impressed, Usopp-san, Brook said happily, before you were too scared to go to the Grand Line, but you sure sounded like you wanted to. Ha ha ha, Usopp laughed nervously as he rubbed the back of his head. The truth was, after he saw Zoro fighting so hard for his dream, it made him ashamed to be so worried. Luffy stretched out to grab the hat, and he was grinning from ear to ear. Yeah, let's do it. The Krieg pirates were getting ready to attack them again now that the threat was gone, and Usopp took charge of sailing the boat after Nami. Hey Pops, Luffy cried out, still hanging on the side of the Baratie. Can I stop doing these chores if I get those pirates out of here? Suit yourself, Zeph answered in a voice as if he couldn't care less. Oh, so that's what happened, Usopp said. He got rid of the pirates and paid off his debt. Yep, Sanji answered with the smell of his cigarette smoke in the air. And that fight between you two looked even worse, seeing it a second time, Moss head. Who would have thought it? You still could have been killed. Chopper snapped at Zoro, feeling the need to give him a thorough check-up once this was all over. I lived, what's the problem? He demanded. The problem is that you're always doing stuff like this. Chopper yelled at him furiously. Mihawk could have easily killed you, but you kept going anyway. Yow. Frankie called out, Zoro, you really lost it there. You were just waving those swords around. Now that wasn't good. Even Frankie could see that, and he barely knew how to use one. He sighed as he ran his fingers through his green hair. I know that I was outmatched. If Mihawk hadn't been so merciful, I know I would have died. I get it, so stop bringing it all up. But why didn't Luffy step in? Or let Johnny and Yosaku? Nami asked in annoyance. I mean, I get that he doesn't want to get involved in someone else's fight, but come on, he should have known that Zoro was in trouble. He did know, Robin sighed as Sanji nodded dully. And when they looked at her, she went on, but Zoro wanted it this way. I think he knew that Zoro never would have forgiven him if he stepped in. And besides, even if he had told you not to fight, that wouldn't stop you, would it? She added when she looked at Zoro. Zoro sighed. It's over and done with, he said. I'm not proud of what happened, and I feel shame in more ways than one over how it all went down. But, what can you do? Luffy's voice suddenly sounded, and they looked to see him hanging upside down as he looked at the pirates. Grinning from ear to ear, he leaned up, to continue hanging from the railing as he looked at Zeph. Okay Pops, you promised me, remember? He said, just making sure he understood everything. If I run those pirates off, then my debt to you is clear. No more chores. That's the deal, Zeph confirmed with a nod. There's no telling how much more of my restaurant you'll screw up if you stick around. All in all, I think it worked out for the best for everyone. Sanji nodded as Luffy laughed in agreement and bonked his own head, letting them know that he knew how clumsy he was. So kid, Zeph said in interest, you said you were gonna be king of the pirates. Were you serious? Oh, he means it and he's intending to do it even if it means he'll die at the end of it, Usopp nodded. Well yeah, of course, Luffy answered without a doubt in his mind, I'm definitely gonna be king of the pirates someday. Don't we know it, Nami laughed. Zeph smirked. I've seen a whole lot of pirates in my day, but you're the first to state your desire so clearly and without a doubt. I heard that back in the day, you were a pretty awesome pirate yourself, Luffy said. Awesome nothing, Sanji said, remembering the intimidating figure of Redfoot Zeph when he boarded that cruise ship all those years ago. So did you wanna be king of the pirates too? Luffy asked curiously. Zeph looked up at the sky to see a seagull soaring above and answered, I do my best to forget about the past, I'm the owner of Baratie now and that's quite enough for me. I guess he must have had a rough and complicated life as well, Brook said softly, understanding the look on Zeph's face. But Sanji felt the usual pang of guilt in him when he thought about how the old man gave up leg for him. He looked at his past self and could see the sad expression on his own face, but that soon changed. Krieg gave the command for the pirates to start attacking the Baratie. However, the chefs were ready to fight. Luffy launched himself over to them and was easily able to fight them all off, just knocking them back with little effort. Go Luffy! Chopper cheered on with the chefs, all of them calling him, Chore Boy. It's hard to believe. The Grand Line is crawling with guys like these. Memory Sanji asked, shaking his head. You get used to it, Usopp sighed. In fact, Luffy's ability isn't the strangest we've seen. What do you think the strangest is, Usopp? Chopper asked curiously. They were so busy talking about it, they didn't notice that the past Sanji telling the other cooks to do something for him. Usopp thought it over before he said, Giraffe Man, he decided on. Giraffe, repeated Brook in confusion. We met him back at Eni's lobby, Zoro nodded, fully understanding what he meant. Really? I thought that Soap Woman was stranger than that, Nami disagreed. What are you? Brook asked but she shook her head. Nothing, she confessed. I'm sure we'll find out sooner or later. Now that was something she wasn't looking forward to seeing, everything that happened at Eni's lobby. That whole incident was like a bad dream, and she dreading the fact that they might see what happened there. Sanji, Zeph's voice interrupted and they looked to see Zeph staring ahead at the fight, but still addressing the Sanji standing next to him. Pay special attention to how this one fights, he said, don't take your eyes off him for a moment, until this fight is over. Is that clear? While his past self looked confused, current Sanji did as he glanced up to see Luffy standing against the pirates. He got that Zeph wanted him to watch someone fighting for his dream as strong as he was, he hoped that he would realize that staying here at the Baratie wasn't the answer. Luffy, who was now hanging from one of the broken masts, was looking down at the pirates calling out, so let me see if I got this straight. You're attacking the restaurant that gave you food. I got no choice but to beat some manners into you. Like you're one to talk about manners, you shitty idiot, Sanji sighed, a hint of fondness in his voice. But Zoro and Robin were both glancing at each other in worry as Chopper and Brook also seemed antsy as they had their eyes trailed on Luffy. They were fighting on a broken deck out at sea, you couldn't ask for a worse battlefield for a devil fruit user. One slip and it was all over for Luffy. Krieg laughed, mocking him to fight on the water as the whole restaurant began to shake. With a great rumbling noise, something was coming up from under the sea and some of them were screaming in fear. Relax, Sanji told them all, it's just the fins. The what? Frankie asked startled as he got a glimpse of dark wood breaking through the surface. Sanji just smiled. We planned for everything, he answered, and the fins were actually a wooden deck for them to all stand on. While it does give us more room, what's the point of this, Sanji-san? Brook asked as the past Sanji walked forward so that he was standing on in the restaurant's doorway. He and the other cooks stood there, ready to defend the ship, all of them refusing to give up. To keep the restaurant from getting hit, he answered coolly. So we gave them the choice to destroy the fins rather than the Baratie itself. As they watched, Patty and Carne pulled out a secret weapon that had been hidden in the fish head of the Baratie and declared that they were gonna use it to protect the ship no matter what. Yeah, Usopp cheered on with Chopper. And that's no fish tail. Frankie shook his head. Amateurs, a little cannon in the fish. It turns out that Krieg was more than just some armor and pistols however. He was able to stop the weapon with his bare hands and had actually threw it back towards the chefs. Didn't see that coming, Robin said calmly as Usopp and Chopper both looked crestfallen at that. Looks like he is strong after all, Zoro said, though he still didn't sound impressed either even as the giant fish head came hurtling at them. Thankfully Sanji took care of it when he jumped up and with a single kick, stopped it in its tracks. Wow, you stopped it Sanji. Chopper cried out eagerly as the fish head smashed into the fin and leaving the restaurant unscathed. Well, I had to something to stop them, Sanji stated smugly. You realize that you could have killed the two in there, right? Robin asked as Chopper's cheer was caught in his throat. I wasn't worried, he answered coolly. Those two are too stubborn to die. You sound a little frustrated at that, Nami said, her eyebrows raised. Bursting out from the wreckage, Patty and Carne were yelling at Sanji for almost killing them just as the Krieg pirates jumped up to fight, boarding the fins and laughing. It started off as a standoff, but the cooks rushed in to fight, but they were no match for their sheer numbers. However, the worst part was listening to them brag at how strong they were, and it was enough to make the Straw Hats all roll their eyes. They weren't the only ones, for the cooks refused to take it. They said that this restaurant was their home and they weren't giving it up to them without a fight. Patty and Carne were a lot stronger than the rest of them and were able to fight them off, at least until another one of Krieg's men appeared. He was a towering man, was dressed with 2 large iron plates covering his front and back side, as well as 2 small plates on his hands with large pearls embedded in them. "Who's that?" Chopper asked as some of the other crew had sweat drop around their heads. "I am Pearl, the invincible shield," he cried out. "Oh," Chopper muttered as they all shook their heads. "That Pearl can go jump in an oyster for all I care," Sanji said, rolling his eyes. "Invincible shield my ass," Zoro muttered. "I could take him out in half a second, if even that." Pearl had taken out both Patty and Carne, but when the pirates tried to take Patty's knife from his hands, Sanji kicked them out, outraged that they would try to touch a kitchen knife, a chef's soul. They didn't even have the right to touch it, let alone use it. Sanji snarled at that, feeling outraged all over again. But as the pirates charged him, he took them all out with a few kicks as Pearl mocked him about only fighting with his legs. "I'm a cook, remember?" Memory, Sanji demanded. "I couldn't do my job very well if I ruined my hands in battle." He held up a leg and finished, "So I'll be taking you down with my feet." Pearl merely went on to explain that he won all 61 battles without a stretch, that he never shed a drop of blood in battle. Sanji smirked, knowing that wasn't gonna last much longer. And no sooner were those words out of Pearl's mouth when Krieg pulled out a spiked ball and swung it around, trying to take Luffy out with it. Luffy was sent flying through the air, but when he landed, he ended up hitting Pearl in the back of the head with such force he gave him a nosebleed. "Well, that's an end to him never dropping any blood," Robin stated as the others all shook their heads. Really, this was getting pathetic. "Are all these pirates in the East Blue like this?" Frankie asked, exasperated. "More or less," Zoro shrugged. "I guess we're the odd crew out." But as Pearl stared at the blood, his eyes were widening and he was shaking. The other Krieg pirates were all telling Pearl to stay calm, that it was only a nosebleed. "Oh big baby," Nami said incredulously, "he got one little nosebleed and he's crying about it." "More or less," Sanji admitted. These people aren't just mean, they're dangerous." Pearl muttered, his face twitching horribly at that. "So," past Sanji said slowly, looking around at everyone, "wanna tell me why everyone's freaking out?" Luffy, who was picking his nose, said, "They're worried about a nosebleed." Pearl was banging the 2 shields on his hands together, looking close to freaking out, screaming out, "Danger, danger." "Gez, what is that guy doing?" Memory, Sanji yelled in annoyance. "Something stupid," present-day Sanji answered just as Pearl set himself on fire. "Didn't see that coming," Robin said in surprise. Pearl set the ship and even his own crewmates on fire, and as the blaze spread, it had created a sort of wall of fire around him to keep any potential attackers at bay. "What's with him? He's gonna burn down the ship he's trying to steal." Chopper cried out fearfully as the fire spread and soon the entire fin was now in flames. "Why do you sound surprised?" Nami asked with a sigh. "These guys obviously don't think about anything that they do now today." Past Sanji couldn't take it anymore as he jumped high, over the wall of flames. Pearl looked horrified. But these flames scare everyone away." He screamed out, looking ready to cry. "Well," Sanji answered, holding out his cigarette, looking like he didn't have a care in the world at that moment. "I wouldn't be much of a cook if I was afraid of fire." "You tell him, Sanji." Usopp cried out. "As expected of you, Sanji-san," Brook said in amazement. Zoro rolled his eye. "Really? He didn't even do anything. He just jumped over the fire, for crying out loud. Like he thought the cook was worthless. Why not take out the fire or something useful?" Robin, on the other hand, couldn't help but wonder something when Sanji spoke about not being afraid of fire. She glanced around, trying to find Luffy as Memory. Sanji continued his beating on Pearl, though he couldn't make it through that shield and only seemed to make the crybaby more and more upset. "Please, Current," Sanji said as he viewed the fight, "I've worked with Steak tougher than him." "Then hurry up and deal with him," Zoro said in annoyance. But Pearl seemed to lose it completely as he shot out flaming pearls, aiming them directly at the restaurant, determined to set it on fire too. But Zeph was one step ahead of him. When the pearls neared him, he stood on his one good leg and used the peg leg to give a swift kick, and the gust from that attack had actually put the fires out and caused them to drop to the deck harmlessly. "Wow," Chopper cried out, admiration shining in his eyes. "So he can still fight?" "Of course he can," Sanji answered as if it was all obvious when needed. But with the fire still raging, Krieg had decided to take out the fin himself with the spiked ball. When he threw it, he aimed it directly over where Sanji and Pearl were fighting, but with them both trapped by the fire, they had nowhere to go. "You're gonna get crushed to death," Brook screamed out in panic as Sanji's past self stared up in horror at it as well. But just before it hit, Luffy came jumping through the fire and saved Sanji by using a gum-gum bazooka to send the ball flying back towards Krieg. He tossed that thing right back. Memory, Sanji gasped in shock as Luffy was now attempting to put out the fire on his backside. But Robin smiled in relief. She knew that Luffy had once had a terrible fear of fire and she couldn't blame him one bit for that after seeing the Great Terminal fire, and even after a few years, he still seemed to have nightmares about it, if what Ace said was true. But she was pleased to see that Luffy seemed too recovered from it, at least enough to be able to face it again. It did her a lot of good to see that. As she looked back, she could see that the spiked ball was flung into another broken mast, smashing it apart even further, and when it fell, it ended up breaking on Pearl's head, knocking him out and put an end to the fire. You think he had that planned out? Usopp asked in amazement. I would say it was more luck than anything, Nami disagreed. This is sad, Frankie said, shaking his head. Don't you guys fight anyone worth it? First you had to deal with that idiot Buggy, then that piece of scum Kuro. And now this guy, Zoro agreed dully. Yeah, I see your point. I don't think we've fought anyone normal since we joined Luffy's crew. I wonder if that means something, Robin said in amusement. However, the Krieg pirates have not said their last word. While they were fighting, Jin had snuck up behind Zeph, and was now holding him a gunpoint. Now that was rare, Sanji said as he watched Jin holding Zeph down, the double-barrel gun pointed at his head. Someone actually managed to sneak up on the old geezer. Was he alright? Chopper asked worried. How shameful, added Brook as he watched, he attacked from behind like that. Relax, Sanji said waving his hand at them all, it'll take a lot more than that to kill him off. Jin couldn't bring himself to kill him in the end. With this, Memory Sanji was asked to surrender. Jin demanded to have the ship, then threatened to kill Zeph if Sanji fought back against Pearl, who managed to get back to his feet. But Sanji wasn't moving, and he even went as far as to mock Zeph for the state he was in. However, the whole time, he tried to get Jin to come after him instead. He should at least be man enough to take him down without resorting to this, Zoro said with a sigh. But what could you do? Nami asked him worriedly. If you tried to fight back, then he could have killed Zeph. Yes, the only way to ensure his safety was to give up the ship, Brook added, but then Pearl launched another attack, and without raising a leg to defend himself, Sanji's past self was slammed into the side of the restaurant. Sanji! Luffy screamed out as blood started dripping down from Sanji's face, and Chopper was screaming in worry as Luffy finished yelling, why didn't you dodge that? Even someone as slow as you, crud cook. I expected you to be able to dodge even that, Zoro stated. Would you shut up for once, Cactus Head? He yelled back. Because, Memory Sanji hissed to Luffy, answering his question, if I did that rat over there would have pulled the trigger on Zeph. There was silence for a moment as that sunk in. You never would have guessed you care so much given it how often you two fight, Usopp said quietly as the memory began to cough up blood. I owed that much to the old man, Sanji answered as Jin tried to plead into just giving up the restaurant and that he wouldn't get hurt. But Sanji just couldn't, he couldn't give it up, and he knew what was gonna come up. This restaurant is that old man's life. Past, Sanji declared from where he lay, lowering his head in guilt as he confessed. I've already took everything else that man holds dear. Blinking in surprise, Robin looked over to Sanji and asked softly, Sanji. Due to what he had done to Zeph in the past, he refused to make that old man give up another one of his treasures. But he didn't say anything as he let his past answer for him. His power, his dreams. So while I'm around, he then screamed out, I'm not gonna let anything else get taken from him. Seeing this behavior, the other chefs asked Sanji what he meant by this, and the Straw Hats were all wondering as well, but they seemed almost afraid to ask. There, Sanji didn't say a word as he lowered his head to hide his eyes from them as his past self was being attacked by Pearl, who took the opportunity for some payback, and had slammed his shields into his head, and blood was now pouring out of his mouth and nose. Sanji, what did you mean by that? Frankie finally had the nerve to ask. For a few seconds, he didn't answer. I took everything from him like I said, he said simply, with his past self was coughing up blood from where he lay. Even though I never asked him to, he gave up everything for me, it was my fault. Memory Sanji was able to raise his head and told the cooks everything. He explained that he owed Zeph his life. How that, 9 years earlier, when he was a child, he was working as a ship's cook on a cruise ship in the North Blue. One night, the pirate Red Leg Zeph and his crew attacked the ship and pilfered it for anything valuable. However, both ships were caught in a sudden storm, and were destroyed. As they sank, Zeph managed to save them both from drowning, but had lost part of his leg in the process, and the two were washed onto a rock outcropping, high above the sea. Apparently the two of them were the only survivors, but despite living through the storm, the island they were on was like a slow and painful death sentence. There was little food for them. Only a few rations had washed onto the rock with them, but there wasn't any trees or plants, no animals, and no way to reach the water to fish. Splitting up what little rations they had, Zeph ordered Sanji to sit at the other end of the island, and look for a ship. Zeph had given Sanji enough food for 5 days, but he had been able to make it last for about 20, and how he had nothing left but a moldy loaf of bread. But still no one ever came. Weeks passed and then months, finally it came to a point that it was like he had been trapped in a daze. He was stuck staring out at the sea for so long that he could no longer tell the difference between the sun rising or setting. After about 3 months, he was starved to within an inch of his life, hardly more than skin and bones. Emaciated and desperate for food, he decided to take a chance and kill Zeph for his food. But when he slashed open the old man's sack in a fit of rage, he discovered that there was only treasure inside. That was when he realized that, not only did Zeph give him all the food that they had, but Zeph had sacrificed his own leg for him as well. Soon afterwards, a ship finally appeared, and they were spared from death. Because of this ordeal, Sanji pledged to never refuse food to a starving individual, no matter how evil or poor they may be. The Straw Hats were all stunned by this as they watched Sanji next to them and in the memory. Sanji, Chopper whispered in shock. I never gave up as a child, Sanji said quietly, knowing that they were all staring at him. And I wasn't gonna give up here. He did all that for you. Nami whispered, her eyes wide. Yeah, we were stranded like that, Sanji answered, still puffing on his cigarette. And now you all know. We were the only two who made it and there wasn't anything to eat on that island but rocks. After going all that time without food, I know only too well what a horrible experience it is to starve to death. I can't remember exactly how long I was out there, I lost track of the days, but any longer and I wouldn't be here. As soon as we were finally rescued, I vowed from that moment on that I wasn't going to let anyone else suffer like that if I can help it. At those words, the 4 sensitive members were all crying again. Aw man, Usopp sniffled, hiding his eyes as the tears fell. That's just amazing. Now I get why you didn't want to leave. And that Zeph, what a hero. Such a brave soul. Brooks cried out as well as Frankie bawled out at the top of his lungs, unable to find anything to say, or rather they couldn't understand anything he said as they were a big garble. I never could have gone that long without food. I'd have starved to death in no time at all. Ah, but I'm already dead. Yo ho ho ho. It does explain a lot now, Nami said, also wiping away a few stray tears. Even Zoro was feeling some respect for the cook. Not just anyone could go through all that and still have the will to live. If Mr. Nosebleed was as starved as much as he thought he was, then he might prove to be tougher than they knew. Sanji didn't say a word as his past self was struggling to get back to his feet. His hand curling up into a fist, he gasped out, that old fart, gave up his leg so that I could live. Everyone in the memory stared at him as he got to his feet and declared. There's no way to repay the old geezer for his kindness unless I risk my life for him. But Brook, who had stopped crying for a moment, asked him, but Zeph-san saved you for a reason. If you got yourself killed then all his sacrifices would have been for nothing. I get it now, Sanji said, but to me, this was the right thing to do. However, not everyone agreed. Luffy's eyes turned dark and was just looking at him as Jin asked Sanji why he got back up. Past Sanji smirked as he said, "Afraid I can't do that. It's a little too much like giving up." The other cooks were trying to warn Sanji that he was gonna get himself killed. Their words all fell on deaf ears because the Straw Hats could all see in his eyes that Sanji was ready to die for the Bharati. But then Luffy did something unexpected, he seemed to have lost it completely. With a dangerous look in his eyes, shaking in anger, he launched his foot up in the air, they knew that look anywhere. No don't. Past Sanji screamed, also understanding what was about to happen, Jin'll shot the old man. But Luffy was no longer listening as he screamed out the top of his lung, gum gum, and like that, his foot came slamming down from the sky so that when it landed on the fin, it was instantly smashed to pieces. With a dangerous, wild look in his eyes that was nothing his normal, cheerful self as he finished his attack, battle axe. The world seemed to shake as his foot came down and with a great booming sound, the shrapnel went flying every which way and the ocean water came down like rain. There was stunned silence for a moment as they tried to recover from what just happened. Wow, Chopper said quietly, his own eyes wide as he stared at Luffy, who was standing on one of the floating pieces, his face mostly hidden, but he was still smiling, glad for what he did. But with fury on his face, Krieg ordered Jin to hurry and kill Zeph, except Jin seemed reluctant to do so. I don't see why you're all so upset, Luffy said as Sanji tried to tell him off for what he did to the Bharati, but as he got up Luffy finished, but I'm gonna sink it. And by looking at the look on his face, they could tell that he was deadly serious. He's not kidding around is he? Robin asked as some of the others were horrified. What is he thinking? Nami demanded, how's destroying the restaurant gonna fix anything? Without the restaurant the pirates'll have no reason to stick around, Zoro answered coolly, understanding what Luffy was thinking. But what about the cooks? Usopp cried out, what are they gonna do? Swim to land? I'm just telling you what his plan is, Zoro shrugged. No one in the memory could seem to believe what they were hearing and past Sanji even got right up in Luffy's face. You bastard, that's what you're doing. He demanded furiously, you can't sink this ship. But if the restaurant's gone then there's no reason to attack then is there? Luffy retorted. Yeah, but then what will happen? Chopper screamed out. No. Past Sanji screamed at him. But the present day Sanji could get where Luffy was coming from, and as he looked down at Zeph, he could see the smirk on his face. He could see that his old mentor agreed with Luffy's way of thinking as well. But his past self wasn't thinking about that. This ship saved my life. I owe everything to her. And you will not take that away. You're gonna die for a dumb old restaurant. Luffy asked him, and for the first time it sounded like he thought Sanji was the crazy one here. Are you stupid? What did you say? Past Sanji growled. Yeah, he's the last person to be telling someone that they're stupid, current Sanji stated. Maybe, but he was right about this one, Zoro said rolling his eye. Really? A restaurant? You were willing to die over something like that? Oh, shut up. He snapped back. I owed everything I am to that place. It was my home as well. What? You just expect me to stand back and watch it get destroyed or taken by Krieg? Getting killed. Luffy yelled out as he grabbed Sanji by his jacket and pulled him right into his face. That's how you're gonna repay your debt. The old man didn't save you so you could kill yourself. He did it so that you could do something with your life. Not to die like a fool. I can't believe it, but he's making sense, Nami said. She wished she'd stayed so that she could see such an historic event. Who would have thought that Luffy was the one actually being the voice of reason? Once again, he continued to surprise them all. Current Sanji didn't say anything else as he thought about it all. Luffy did know, didn't he? After all, Shanks gave up an arm to save him from that Sea King. Thinking back, he now knew that his rubber-brained captain knew better than anyone what that felt like. Luffy was an idiot, no doubt about that, but he also now understood that because of that simple mind of his, he can see past events that have taken place and realize just what needed to be done. And so your big idea is to help them attack us? Past Sanji yelled back, the two almost nose to nose again, like how he and Zoro used to fight. It was a surreal experience since the two of them only ever fought about food. You know, Robin sighed, it's sad to see two such good friends fight. Especially when you have so many enemies around you who are trying to kill you. Robin, why do you have such a scary mind? Usopp asked fearfully. Meanwhile, Pearl was laughing, telling them all that they couldn't do anything so long as Zeph was their captive and that he was gonna kill them both himself. However, before Pearl could strike Sanji and Luffy, Jin suddenly abandoned his duty of holding Zeph at gunpoint and dashed forward so that he quickly defeated him. Some of the Straw Hats were stunned at that. Why'd he do that? Frankie yelled. He took out his own crewmate. He couldn't let someone else do it, Sanji admitted. I can't say for sure what was going on in his head, but apparently wanting to kill me himself was his idea of honor. What? Chopper cried out hysterically. You saved his life and he wants to kill you. Usopp gasped. Krieg was also yelling at Jin, demanding to know what he was doing, but Jin stated that he will be the one to finish off Sanji, that he owed him this much. Here, they found out that Jin was Krieg's chef commander, his second in command more or less. And the rest of the Krieg pirates all agreed that he was strong and a merciless monster to them all. You mean to tell me that half-dead guy is his right-hand man? Frankie demanded. In big armadas it's not that unusual to have commanders, Robin stated. An officer in command of a particular portion of an armed force helps to control the entire fleet. After all, with 50 ships, it would be difficult to command them all by yourself. Whitebeard, in particular, had division commanders to help lead his entire crew. You never would have guessed it given what shape he was in when he came here, Nami said, frowning a little as she thought it all over. The wolf behind the sheep's facade, Robin said softly. After running into Mihawk on the Grand Line, and going without food for who knows how long, would take its toll on anyone. Sanji, look, I'm just following orders, Jin said, sounding remorseful. I don't want to ruin this ship, but I think it's too late for that. Maybe, past Sanji said to him darkly. But, if you think you're gonna get to this restaurant without killing me, then you got another thing coming. Like I was gonna surrender to punks like them, present Sanji muttered darkly. Well, who knows? He added as he watched the two size each other up, perhaps in our next lives we'll be friends. Sounds fair, Jin said, lifting his weapon on his shoulder, then it'll be an absolute pleasure to kill you, my good friend. If that's a friend, I hate to see what he considers an enemy, Chopper gulped. Geez, that's comforting, Memory Sanji said as he lit a cigarette, asshole. Well said, Usopp muttered. You as well, chore boy, Jin added, looking over at Luffy. Why does everyone call Luffy chore boy instead his name? Chopper couldn't help but ask. Just something we do in the Bharati, Sanji commented, the new guy is always called that. Oh, I knew that, Chopper said, though he wasn't fooling anyone. Geez, thanks, Luffy said indifferently, but he didn't seem worried at all, but I'm not afraid of any Krieg pirate. Don't see why he should, Frankie laughed. Jin was looking annoyed as the rest of Krieg's crew were all angry and were shrieking out insults and death threats, just outraged he had the gall to say something like that. We are the Krieg pirates, the strongest in East Blue. One of the pirates declared without a doubt in his mind. Luffy looked at them all, as if pitying them and said, only because you outnumbered the other pirates in the East Blue. There was nothing but silence, all the pirates grinding their teeth, looking like they wanted to dismiss it, yet at the same time, they couldn't declare that was a lie. Oh, that had to hurt, Frankie said, but he couldn't stop the grin as they all started laughing. Well done, Luffy, Zoro laughed, he hit them where it hurts. They aren't strong at all, they're all weaklings, they just outnumber everyone else. I don't think they'll like that, Nami laughed, now feeling a lot better. Oh boy, Memory Sanji said, now you really pissed him off. Yes, I was right, Luffy answered. I couldn't agree more, Robin smiled. It was funny seeing how angry that the most feared pirates in the East Blue were getting angry by a few words. In fact, the Krieg pirates saw this as unforgivable and they start to rush in, ready to try and prove themselves. However, they are immediately stopped by Krieg, telling Jin to hurry up and kill them. The battle went on and soon it was Jin and Sanji going at each other. Though strong, there was no doubt in the Straw Hats' minds that Sanji could have beaten him if he hadn't been injured by Pearl. Jin was fast and able to keep up with him, as well as even breaking some of past Sanji's ribs by the sounds of it, but in the end, the injuries were what was making it almost impossible for Sanji to attack without terrible pain. It ended when Jin managed to pin him down and have his weapon above his head. "Are you trying to kill yourself?" Chopper screamed at him. That attack must have broken at least 5 or 6 ribs. "Believe me, I'm not any happier about this than you are," Sanji snapped back in annoyance. "But what else could I do? He was trying to kill me. It's not like I could take a timeout and get a doctor. You still could have done some serious internal injuries because of that," Chopper yelled. "If you had taken out that Pearl guy earlier you wouldn't have been in this position," Zoro commented and Sanji shot him a disgusted look. "At least I was able to fight. You weren't looking too good lying in the boat and crying." Sanji shot back. "What?" Zoro yelled, his sword out. "I'll kill you." Robin's arms suddenly appeared out of their bodies and restrained them both. "Enough," she said firmly. "At least wait until after we get out of this mess before you go at each other, please." With Sanji in pain, Luffy went after Krieg, but Krieg releases his armored and planned to kill Luffy there. He shoots Luffy with boom and spears. That spear ended up hurting Luffy at his foot, and he almost fell into ocean. Then, Luffy asks if Krieg is not serious to fight with him. So, Krieg answers if the important thing in fighting is strategy to kill the opponent. Krieg jeers Luffy as monkey cause he just attacks without strategy. With Luffy dealing with Krieg, something else happened. Just as Jin was about to land the final blow, Sanji found himself before a supposedly heartless pirate unable to kill him. Even with Krieg bellowing at him to it, Jin was crying, declaring that because of Sanji's previous kindness, he just couldn't bring himself to finish the job, he just can't forgive himself if he killed him. "Sometimes just the tiniest bit of kindness can change the way a person thinks," Robin said knowingly. "One good turn deserves another," Brook said softly. "Yeah, but in a real fight I could have taken him on," Sanji said grumpily. Krieg was disappointed with Jin. Although, before that, Jin was the person he trusted the most. Krieg sees excess in Jin's personality that will win in the battlefield with anyway. Then, Jin said that he always followed every order that Krieg had ever given him and that he will always respect and admire him. But, Jin still cannot kill him and begs to let the Baraties ship go. While this saved Sanji from being bludgeoned by Jin, it angered Krieg. "You little son of a bitch." Krieg yelled furiously as he stood up. "You think you can defy my orders and then tell me what to do?" Jin could say nothing as tears continued to flow down his face. "It's pathetic. Morality, sympathy, weaknesses I never expected to see from you." Krieg yelled. "Since when is it a weakness to show compassion?" yelled Chopper. "That's right. By one act of kindness it spared Sanji-san's life. And you owe him your life as well." Brook yelled. "Men like that don't care," Nami sighed, having been forced to deal with losers like him for years. "You are not my chef commander anymore." Krieg continued to yell as he grabbed part of his armor and pointed it directly at the 3 of them. "Pirates," he called to his crew, "step aside." Just then, the skull on the shield opened its mouth to reveal the nozzle of a miniature cannon. At the sight of it, Jin gasped in horror. "No, not the gas," he cried. All the other pirates freaked out as well. "He's gonna use the MH5. We're all gonna die. Where's my mask?" Chopper's eyes widened. "He's actually willing to use MH5. He cried hysterically. "What's that?" Nami cried anxiously. "I'm guessing it's bad." "Isn't MH5 a deadly poison gas?" Robin asked him. "Poison gas?" Usopp screamed out in terror as Chopper nodded to Robin. "Yes," he said, "just breathing it in can kill a normal person in just a few minutes to even a few hours. It's deadly. Unless you can clear your lungs of it immediately there's no saving you. And even then that might only buy you a little time. But that's bad." Brook cried, looking around desperately. "What on earth did you all do?" Krieg's men all had masks to keep them from dying, Sanji explained as the pirates all fished masks out of nowhere and were covering their faces. "The only thing that matters in a battle is who ends up winning," Krieg stated before he smirked, "even if more have got to die. Poison gas is just a means to an end. Victory is all that decides what's right and what's wrong. If you're dead, no one's gonna hear you complain anyway." "I think only the last part is true," Zoro stated in disgust. "He should at least be man enough to fight his own battles without resorting to something so dirty." "When you don't hesitate to do unspeakable, horrible things," Krieg stated, grinning ever wider, "that is true power." Luffy's face was cold and they were all sickened at the thought. Just where did he come up with something like that? Frankie demanded. "He doesn't even deserve to call himself a captain," Brook said as he glanced over to see Jin pulling out his own mask. "Might as well throw that gas mask away," ordered Krieg. "You're no longer worthy to be a Krieg pirate." Luffy charged at Krieg, trying to make one last-ditch effort to stop him, and even proclaiming that he wasn't going to let him do it. You're wasting your time, chore boy, Krieg said as he punched the mast Luffy was running on, shattering it to pieces and causing him to lose his footing. He then took his opening as he shot Luffy with long yellow and green spikes from a Gatling gun, forcing him to land painfully back on the same platform with Sanji and Jin all over again. Damn it, Frankie hissed, he can't even get close without risking something blowing up or being fired at. Jin, Luffy yelled suddenly as he forced himself to sit up. You don't have to listen to that blowhard. He looked up, glaring fiercely at Krieg, because I'm going to kick his ass. Jin gritted his teeth, and was actually telling Luffy off for insulting Krieg and that he understood his punishment. What's he thinking? Nami cried out, he can't actually believe he deserves to die now does he? Past Sanji also yelled that at him, telling him to snap out of it because Krieg no longer cared about what happened to him. That he was gonna kill him personally. I deserve it, Jin answered softly. Obeying my emotions meant betraying my captain. But if he disowned him, he's no longer part of his crew, Zoro added, which means that he no longer had to follow his orders. Try telling that to that idiot, Sanji told him. He can't really. Usopp whispered, unable to believe it. Such loyalty and Krieg was actually going to ignore it and let Jin die by his own hands. If I were in his position, I would have done the same thing, Jin said, sounding sure of his resolve, and now, death is the only honor I have left. And to their shock, he went and threw his mask into the water. Now that is true loyalty, Sanji said softly. And that asshole just threw it all away, Zoro added, shaking his head, glaring at Krieg. Jin chose the wrong man to follow. Man, no man would do something like that. Brook said furiously, his hand on his sword, now itching for a chance to take him out. Were you guys the only pirates in the whole East Blue who weren't jackasses? Frankie asked exasperated. Don't. Luffy screamed in horror as he watched the mask hit the water. Why? Past Sanji asked in disbelief. Because he was an idiot, current Sanji said grimly, but he couldn't bring himself to forget what Jin did for him next. Krieg laughed again, making them all angry enough to want to shut up him. So, you remembered your place. He demanded, but it's much too late for that. Now you will both die together. And without another word, he fired the gas bomb. Both pirates and cooks dove into the water as Patty and Carne took Zeph inside. But the three on the platform didn't have time to move anywhere. Thinking fast, Luffy had stolen 2 masks from the pirates before they dove and tossed them to Jin and Sanji. But as he went back to get one for himself, he was too late, there wasn't anyone. Screaming, staring around, Luffy was trying to figure out what to do. No, Chopper screamed in panic, without a mask, or anything to filter the gas heal. Why didn't he think to get one for himself first? Zoro demanded angrily. He never thinks that's the whole problem. Nami yelled as the bomb was only feet away. He can't dive into the water like the others. Robin pointed out, but he can still stretch his head above where the gas is going to hit. But just then, seconds before the bomb hit, she spotted a mask thrown near Luffy's feet and he dove for it just as the explosion hit. Luffy. Most of the crew cried out, fearing the worst as a giant explosion rocked the area and a wave of purple gas filled the air, shrouding everything in front of them so that they couldn't see anything. Don't worry, he survived, Sanji reminded them. But, Chopper croaked out, looking close to freaking out again. But how'd he do that? Usopp demanded, pointing a shaking hand at the scene in front of them. No, I saw it, Robin informed them all as the whole area was now engulfed in the smoke. I don't know where it came from but. That's the whole problem, Sanji said shaking his head at the memory, he couldn't bring himself to finish. It was deadly silent, the only sound came from the cry of a seagull above them, but soon it fell from the sky, dead before it hit the water. Chopper and Brook both screamed at the sight of it. It's dead, gasped Brook, it killed that bird instantly. They waited, and waited, every minute feeling like it stretched onto an hour. But after a painful 5-minute wait, the gas finally started to clear for them to see just what happened. Most of them were stunned at what they saw. Luffy was indeed safe with a mask on, but the problem was Jin. Sanji yelling through his mask to get Jin off him, who was holding it there, making sure that he couldn't move. Brook croaked out in a hoarse voice. Yeah, he saved me, Sanji admitted with a nod. Jin, are you okay? Luffy gasped. Jin didn't answer him, but his skin was now a sickly, dark purple and he was struggling for breath, coughing up blood from his mouth and nose. Every single painful gasp was weaker than the last. Chopper screamed. This is bad. We've got to clear out his lungs or else he'll die. What can we do to stop it? Nami cried anxiously. We can't do anything, Robin said, frowning heavily, this is all in the past now. I know that. Frankie yelled, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. Damn, I hate this. They've got to put a mask on him. Chopper cried out in a scared voice, they've got to clear out his lungs right now. It's your mask, you gave it to me, Luffy whispered, staring at the mask in his hand, realizing what happened. Looks like we owe him one, Usopp said quietly as Jin collapsed just as more blood erupted from his mouth. No, Luffy yelled, heading towards them as Sanji quickly caught him and held him up as he fought for his breath. But when Krieg started to laugh at it, Luffy stopped and turned to glare at him. What a fool, Krieg said, having removed his own mask, and was now mocking Jin's condition. You're paying for a plate of food with your life. Oh well, maybe you'll learn, when you're dead. That bastard. Usopp yelled furiously, his hand going to his slingshot before he remembered it wouldn't do any good. First he orders him to kill himself and then mocks him. He should respect the fact that Jin followed his orders in the end. Right now I'm having trouble trying to figure out who's worse, Nami said, shaking in anger. Kuro or Krieg? I'd say that they're both the same level of slime, Frankie informed her. Memory Sanji was still holding Jin, who was gasping out Krieg's name. Whether it was in anger or pleading, it was hard to say as he wheezed for air. Jin, Sanji whispered softly, so it seems, he glared up at Krieg with disgust, that Don Krieg wasn't the right man for you to follow was he. Krieg just laughed, and the sound of it was making them long to hit him. It figures that you would still feel for that pathetic scum, he said loudly. Scum, past Sanji exclaimed in rage. That's right, anyone who loses focus and betrays my ship is worthless to me, Krieg said as he grinned again. He would almost certainly do it again. Putting him out of his misery is an act of mercy to keep him from dishonoring himself in the future and endangering my crew. Seriously, were you five the only decent pirates in the East Blue? Frankie asked again heatedly. Probably, Nami sighed, shaking her head. This is quite common among some pirates, Robin said knowingly. She had seen many times in her life to know just how it happened. The Krieg pirates, meanwhile, just couldn't believe that Krieg would kill Jin. No one was more loyal to Krieg than Jin, and the Straw Hats all learned that when they escaped from the Grand Line and were being pursued by Full Body, Jin went out alone and masqueraded as Krieg. Jin always sacrificed himself to save Krieg and he did anything to win, that's why people called him, Demon. Wow, he did all that for Krieg, and look at how he thanks him, Usopp said angrily. Jin just had poor judgment, Zoro sighed. Past Sanji turned to Patty and Carne and told them to get the kid used for food poisoning, as Zeph told him to put the mask on to detoxify the gas in his lungs and then to take him to the upper deck of the Barati where the air was fresher. Krieg just laughed and claimed that because of the poison, Jin will die in 1 hour. Is that true, Chopper? Usopp asked quickly, his eyes wide with concern. It's hard to say, everybody is different, which means that poison affects everyone a little differently, Chopper said, trying to leap over and get a better look at Jin. To determine a person's time of death would be hard, but it is possible. Their only chance to save him is to do what Zeph said, to help him breath and clear out the poison. But even then, that might not be enough. Luffy suddenly spoke again. Don't you dare die, Jin, he said, and though his words were quiet, everyone seemed to have heard it and turned to look at him. Even Jin raised his head a little to try and see him, though it was hard to tell with the mask over his face. You can't let someone like him win, Luffy told him, his eyes as sharp and cold as Mihawk's had been as he glared at Krieg. Stick around. Now I'm mad. You'll wanna see what I'm gonna do to him next. Give that guy a beating that he won't ever forget. Nami cheered on. They'd been waiting too long to see that jerk get the beating of a lifetime. Jin, however, didn't believe that Luffy can defeat Krieg. Even past Sanji tries to stop him too and yelled that he will be killed if he attacks him head on. To make everyone stop worrying, Luffy just said, I'm not worried. And then he started his attack at Krieg's front. Go ahead and give it your best shot. He screamed as Krieg grinned cockily and Sanji cried for him not to do it. But Luffy ignored him as he charged ahead, and they knew that he wasn't going to back down this time. You are only running towards one thing, chore boy. And that is, Krieg said as he threw several small bombs into the water, your funeral. You wanna bet? Brook yelled, waving his sword in the air. My funeral, Luffy repeated scathingly. The bombs went off and the water splashed up around him, and that was when Krieg took out his spike machine gun again and shot through the water. Oh, there's no way he could have escaped from that, Robin said. Don't say things like that, Robin, Chopper cried out as Krieg continued his hail of spikes. But Luffy still ran through it, and when he burst out of the waves some of them cringed at seeing several of the long spikes embedded deeply in his body. But Luffy ignored the pain as he neared Krieg. Stretching his arm out, gum. Realizing that he was going to try and attack, Krieg revealed a robe made of dangerous spikes to deter any attacks. Luffy, stop it. Usopp screamed when he saw them, but too late. Pistol, Luffy yelled, as he went and punched him right through the metal spikes, the spikes tearing his own fist open, and managed to strike Krieg dead in the face. Chopper, Usopp, Nami, Frankie, and Brook were all screaming in pain at the sight of it. Again, this is worse to watch than the first time, Sanji said, massaging his own hands. He'd rather give up a leg than a hand here. He punched right through the spikes. Nami screamed out, recoiling at the sight of it. Ow, 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 Usopp yelled, wishing that he didn't see that. Oh, that hurt just looking at it. He almost ripped his hand apart. Chopper screamed, twisting his face around with his hooves. He could have permanently ruined it. My skin is crawling at the thought of it, Brook added as he shivered. Not that I have skin at all. Nothing stops him, Robin said with a smile as Zoro smirked as well. Everyone else thought so as well. Both pirates and cooks were staring in horror at what Luffy had just done. Someone then summed up all their thoughts by shouting out 3 words, "That's messed up." I couldn't have said it better, Current Sanji agreed as they watched the blood dripping down from Luffy's injured hand. He was standing there almost like a zombie for a moment before he went and began to pull the spikes out. "So is this my funeral?" he asked as he pulled out the first spike and threw it to the ground and went on, "Or yours?" He went for another spike. "You can't kill me, with little spikes." Out came that one. "My funeral," he threw out the last spike, "will take more than this." Breathing hard for a minute and biting back the pain, he went on, "You'll have to do better than that, if you wanna beat me." He looked back up, grinned wildly, "'Cause I don't think it's time for me to die just yet. I'll never understand that idiot." Usopp sighed, really what was he thinking doing something that crazy? The memory Sanji, who was nursing his wounds from Jin, was now looking over at him. "I know one thing, he's nuts," he said to Zeph. "And I still believe that," he agreed, but he was smiling as he pulled his cigarette out of his mouth. Zeph smirked down at him before he said, "I've seen 1 or 2 like him before. Stubborn kids who rather die and have to turn away from a fight once it's started." Zoro grinned at that as well. Pretty much the whole crew was like that these days. He, himself, was a prime example of that. "He'll stay," past Sanji said knowingly. "That's for sure. I'm glad he's with us cause guys like that are hell to fight," Zeph said conversationally. "And I know that all too well as well," Sanji laughed as he watched. "I don't care if he wins or loses," Zeph finished. "I consider it an honor just to be able to watch him." "Because you're watching the future Pirate King take him out," Frankie laughed as Luffy stared Krieg down until he was able to stand up again. "So boy, it's not your funeral yet is it?" "Too bad," Krieg snarled from where he lay and slowly began to life himself up. "Because one of us has got to go. And since I'm here, I'd really like to pay my respects." He charged Luffy and slammed one of his shields at point blank. "Go to hell." He screamed as he fired a miniature explosion. But Luffy easily jumped to avoid it and even hooked his foot on Krieg's shoulder when he jumped over him, knocking him down twice in under a minute. "You first," Luffy shouted out as the bulky armor hit the platform with a resounding thud. "Yeah, go Luffy." Usopp and Chopper both cried out, jumping up and down excitedly. "What a weakling," Zoro said, rolling his eye. "He's nothing without his toys." "I think that would be the point," Robin said, understanding everything. Meanwhile, this creates severe anguish amongst his crew members, as Krieg has always came out of a battle unscathed. It was the first time they had ever seen Krieg being knocked down and they were all wondering that he wasn't invincible after all and his reputation would be destroyed if a kid was able to defeat him. "You think?" Nami sighed, shaking her head as the cooks all continued to cheer on, "Chore boy, on." However, when one crewmate began to believe that Luffy might just be stronger than Krieg, that got his attention. "Shut up maggots. Never doubt me," Krieg screamed before combining his shoulder plates together to form his mighty battle spear, which he slams into the ground next to Luffy, creating an explosion. "What was that?" Brook called in surprise. "Yet another weapon he's so proud of," Sanji sighed. The Krieg pirates were finally rejoicing as they see Krieg's secret weapon, as he discards his cape and explained that it was stronger than the spikes he fired at Luffy earlier. While Luffy wondered out loud how the spear made an explosion as he hid behind a broken part of the ship, Krieg gave him an answer by bragging once again. "My mighty battle spear," he boasted, "it's different from any other. When this thing hits you, you won't just be wounded and failing, you'll be blown straight into hell." Continuing the battle, the surrounding wreckage was eventually reduced to sunken rubble with both combatants having very little room to move on. Krieg sung it again, sending Luffy flying over the ocean, but luckily, he stretches towards one of the floating platforms to save himself. However, due to the fact that he has lost so much blood thanks to Krieg, and that the platform he's standing on was unstable, he soon falls to his knees. Chopper let out a cry of worry. "He lost too much blood," Robin said worriedly, "and he's fighting on the ocean. This is the worst-case scenario. What can he do?" Frankie asked. "There's not much he can do," Nami said at once, "one slip and he's history." Sanji didn't say anything but his past self was already doing that. He had no idea how pessimistic he sounded back here. "He's lost way too much blood," he said, still holding onto his hurt ribs, "he can't fight for much longer. This better end quickly." "But what is the battle spear?" Brook asked just as the pirates all began to talk amongst themselves about Krieg's weapon, which apparently creates explosions depending on how powerful the blow is. The crew members mentioned that as the lance weighs around 1 ton, yet Krieg can swing it around with only one arm. "I get it," Frankie said frowning. "Crude, but effective. Not that it has anything on Frankie Shogun." "No way." Chopper agreed with him, "That thing's awesome." Nami and Robin both looked at each other, their eyebrows raised but not saying anything to that. Krieg continues his assault on Luffy, who was dodging for his life. He jumped to the section of the ship Luffy was resting on and ended up blowing it up. On and on, Luffy was being attacked and was forced to only dodge until he found a way out of it. He was able to keep it up for a while before he finally lost his balance, which makes him wide open for an attack. However, just in the nick of time, Luffy grabbed the lance before it can hit him. Enraged, Krieg slams the spear into the ground, forcing Luffy to let go. Krieg proceeded to ram the spear at Luffy, who punched the tip, creating an explosion which sent him flying through the air. "That idiot, why'd he punch the spear head?" yelled Nami. "Well, it was either that or get impaled like a pin cushion," Robin offered. "Oh, the image," screamed Brook in horror at the thought. But already, Luffy was forcing his wounded body to get back up. And like before, Krieg swung the spear at him, and again, Luffy punched the blade, making it explode a second time. "What's the point here?" Usopp cried out. "I get it," Zoro suddenly said, smirking widely. "Clever. Well, he's an idiot, but when it comes to battle he's suddenly a genius," Sanji offered. "I guess having 2 older brothers would do that," Robin offered, also figuring it out. "What are you all talking about?" Brook asked in confusion as Krieg swung again, declaring that he was stronger than Luffy. Nonetheless, Luffy took each hit without budging an inch. "Is he still believing that crap?" Zoro asked in annoyance. "Damn it," past Sanji hissed. "There's no way that Chorboy can take much more of this. That spear is way too powerful." "Don't say a word," current Sanji snapped at them all as they looked at him with their eyebrows raised. "I didn't know just how damn depressing I was here, alright." "No, you're wrong," Zeph said to past Sanji in disagreement. "Even with 100,000 more weapons, our Chorboy can still bring him to his knees because he does not know fear." "That's an understatement," Nami agreed quietly, but smiling a little as she remembered all the fights she saw him win. Not once did he ever show fear. When he fights, it's almost like he becomes someone else. Memory Sanji looked up at Zeph in confusion as Krieg dished out another attack at Luffy, and of course Luffy met it head-on. Burnt black, Luffy landed flat on his back on the wreckage, smoking lightly. Krieg smirked as he turned and walked away, sneering that it was too easy. But at those words, Luffy began to push himself back up. Stopping dead in his tracks, Krieg turned to look as he raised the spear back up. "Now that's impressive," he muttered, but he was looking angry now. "Stand or fall," Zeph went on, "life or death, in a struggle for your very existence, you cannot have even the slightest bit of fear or you will be lost." "Now I can tell that he was someone who truly was a real pirate," Brook said respectfully, now looking forward to meeting Chef Zeph one day. "It is hard to understand how someone fights unless you experience it as well." But past Sanji didn't seem to understand as he asked him what he was talking about. "Really dumbass cook." Zoro smirked at him and Sanji threw out another angry death threat at him. "That kid out there," Zeph answered impatiently, as if speaking to someone dumb, as Luffy charged again and took another blast to the face. "When he's fighting," Zeph said as Luffy pushed himself back up through the broken boards with a grin. "He's not afraid of anything. Not even death." "That is still crazy," Nami said softly, but she got what he was saying here. "Here, just fighting for your dream is enough." Still smiling, Luffy got up once again and went up for another blast to the face. "Is it all instinct?" Zeph asked suddenly, "or all a plan?" He grinned, as if he figured it all out on his own. "We'll know soon, if he lives." "What plan?" Memory Sanji asked him. "Killing himself." "Most would think so," Robin chuckled softly. "But judging from the fact that we all saw him this morning, I'm guessing that he does make it through this." "Barely," Sanji told her. Krieg was getting more annoyed, veins sticking out on his head as he snarled at Luffy, cursing him out. But Luffy just continued to grin as the chefs all cheered from the background. "He just keeps getting up," Chopper said, his eyes wide in respect. "It's like his body refuses to accept failure as an option." "That's Luffy in a nutshell if you ask me," Zoro told him. "I told you," Krieg yelled as he ran with his spear, "today is your funeral." Another boom went off. "I am invincible. Please, I could take you down easy," Zoro spoke again, wishing that he could have had a chance at him. He didn't even have to move from here as he mentally fantasized about sending a flying blade attack at him. "It's not the number of weapons that matters," he went on, "a man and his fists can destroy a fleet. It's all how he uses it. It's courage, not weapons that will decide who wins." Krieg thinks he can conquer anyone who stands in his way cause of those toys. "Yes," Robin agreed, "I see what his problem is. I admit that he does have talent. He is physically strong and he was able to pull together an entire armada of ships. But he forgot all about his strength. He's nothing but surface. A battleship without sails or any other means of moving it." "Well," Frankie said with a smirk. "At least he didn't have to rely only on his own weapons to fight." Just then, Luffy threw himself back at Krieg one more time. "And that would be number 5, Sanji said as another boom sounded off. There was silence for a moment. "There is no doubt that Krieg and his pirates are strong," Zeph continued one, "but Chorboy has something they'll never have. Krieg may have more pirates at his command than anyone else before him, he may have terrible weapons of mass destruction to everything in his path, but he will never have that kid's heart. That's something I think we can all agree on," Brook said softly, holding up his sword. He pledged his sword and life to the pirate captain, Straw Hat Luffy. He had no regrets following such a man. Memory Sanji was just watching it before his one visible eye suddenly widened in understanding. Present-day Sanji smiled at that. This was the moment he fully understood what Zeph was trying to say, why he kept wanting him to leave the restaurant. Funny how it took such a goofball pirate to really teach him that. What's he saying? Chopper asked softly. What he means is that this fight is already won, Zoro explained. See, Luffy's a threat to him, but that goes completely over Krieg's head. He thinks he'll win cause of his spear, but sooner or later, that's not gonna be enough. No sooner did he say that did Luffy slam his foot into the deck, and the shockwave from that broke the tip of the spear, much to Krieg's confusion and horror. The great battle spear, Krieg yelled in disbelief. What the hell did you do? Luffy grinned at him. I just punched it in the head 5 times. It looks tired, maybe it needs a rest. So that's what he was planning. Usopp cheered loudly. Yeah, now that spear's not much of a threat to him. But Robin wasn't so sure. Yes, she knew that this battle was clearly Luffy's, however that didn't mean that he would be beating Krieg that easily. Luffy's eyes narrowed as he said, now it's my turn. But was it really worth it? Nami gasped out, I mean, taking in all that damage just to take out the spear. If it's Krieg's most dangerous weapon then yes, Frankie said with a nod. Besides, Luffy's tougher than that. It'll take a lot more than just a few bombs to kill him off. You ready for this? Because that was all I needed, Luffy said with a huge grin. Now that your little toy's broken, you're nothing to me. Don't get cocky, Luffy, Usopp said, knowing that's what did Krieg in. But that's about it, Sanji said, Krieg's nothing on his own. And if they weren't fighting on the ocean, I'm sure that Luffy could have taken him out a lot sooner. Krieg's eyes narrowed, oh yeah. Yeah, without the blade, it's just a bomb on a stick. And let's face it, that's pretty lame, Luffy stated. I don't think it's that simple, Chopper said nervously as Krieg smirked again. Krieg attacked Luffy again, but Luffy dodged it and jumps up to the mast, swinging around like how a monkey would from the tree. Then Krieg breaks the mast, missing Luffy completely as he threw the mast like a javelin back at him. But, Krieg destroyed it by shooting fire at it from a miniature flamethrower attached to his wrist. This guy's got a flamethrower too. Usopp cried out exasperatedly. How many weapons does that guy have? Past Sanji yelled. Too many, Sanji answered. Everyone was surprised and couldn't believe that Luffy is still able to stand on his feet. Once they were on a stable platform, Luffy ran forward to hit Krieg with his Gum-Gum Gatling. Krieg's armor, however, withstood the attack. Finally angry, Luffy ran forward, stretching his arm out so that he could hit him once again. When his fist hit the armor they could hear the deep ringing noise like a bell when he hit. Damn it, what's that stuff made of? Usopp yelled. Woot's steel armor isn't going to break easily, Robin answered. Luffy kept going, but Krieg hit him with the remains of the spear and he was sent back across the deck. With Krieg mocking Luffy, they were all wishing that they could jump in and teach that guy a lesson. As Luffy was trying to recover, Krieg jumped to the top of the tallest remaining mast and sneered down at him, calling to him to get him to look up. Sanji smiled, knowing just what was gonna happen here, and he couldn't wait to see Luffy beat him all over again. You don't stand a chance, boy. He yelled down, real power comes from deadly weapons. They're the source of true strength. He sneered, see, only the strong are meant to live. And that's me. Really? Sanji asked, shaking his head. How could he have ever thought this moron was a threat? Take your own advice, you asshole. Usopp yelled. Krieg threw out bombs from his place on top the mast, but Luffy chased in to try and stop him. The whole time, there was an evil grin still on his face. Yeah. He challenged, that's what you think. He threw his arms back when he got near enough and they knew just what attack he was gonna use this time. Krieg hit him with his weapon one more time, but it wasn't enough to stop the bazooka that came flying at him. Through the explosion and smoke, Luffy charged through and finished crying out his attack, Krieg screaming in shock. And that was when he was sent flying into the air, his bombs falling from his hands. What's wrong with Luffy? Nami cried out, seeing the blank look in Luffy's eyes, burnt and smoke coming out of his mouth from that last detonation. He's stunned. Chopper screamed out. Though he knew that it wasn't enough to kill him, he knew those bombs must have done a lot of damage. That's it, Krieg bragged as he went flying backwards. After all that big talk, that's all you got. We could say the same thing about you. Frankie yelled angrily, but then he blinked in surprise to see that his golden arm was cracking apart. Krieg noticed it too and was yelling in disbelief about it. However, his smirk was back soon when he noticed that Luffy still didn't move. To him, his destroyed armor was enough of a price for this victory. If it was a victory. But past Sanji realized what those bombs were and screamed up at Luffy, it's a trap. Get out. The bombs Krieg's dropped exploded and destroyed the rest of the battlefield. There wasn't anything left but splinters. The rocking waves put everyone in the water in danger and they screamed as they struggled to stay afloat. They could hear Sanji crying out over the noise in fear. They all sat there, horrified that Luffy was dead as the water fell from the sky like rain once again. But without them realizing it, Zeph's words were suddenly ringing in each of their heads. When he's fighting, he's not afraid of anything. Not even death. Is it all instinct? Or all a plan? We'll know soon, if he lives. Once again, Luffy surprised them all, bursting through the smoke, Krieg screaming out in terror at the sight of his face, losing all his cool. What? Krieg screamed in utter shock. Gum Gum Bazooka. Luffy yelled, and when this attack hit, it did the job. He destroyed the armor by shattered it to pieces and sent him falling to the ocean. I totally win. Luffy screamed out, his hands in the air in victory. He did it. Chopper screamed excitedly. Was there any doubt? Usopp yelled. I wouldn't get my hopes up yet, Sanji said, looking up, remembering what was about to happen. This isn't over yet, boy. Krieg screamed, and Luffy looked taken aback by the fact that he was still in it. Oh, man, what's it gonna take to shut this guy up? Frankie yelled when Krieg shot a steel net from the same arm that had the flamethrower and wrapped around Luffy. He was now trapped and Krieg was laughing as he pulled him to the sea. That's not good, Robin said anxiously, knowing that this was what Krieg had been trying to do from the beginning. Krieg laughed in triumph as he pulled Luffy towards the sea. You can't escape. This is a steel net. Dirty trick, Brook yelled, knowing that Luffy better think fast if he wanted to make it out of this one. Luffy struggled in the net, as Krieg screamed out triumphantly, it's over. That's the ocean down there. Looks like he'll be getting the last laugh after all, chore boy. But Luffy suddenly had an idea, forcing his arms and legs through the net, freeing them. Krieg made one big mistake. Zoro laughed, he let Luffy use his limbs. With his arms and legs free, he laughed out, I got that jerk right where I wanted him. Really? Chopper screamed out animatedly. Sanji just watched, feeling just as amazed as he did back then. He hasn't even flinched at this, he remembered wondering just how he could stay so calm despite all this. Luffy began to spin his legs rapidly and managed to lock his feet around Krieg's head and spun around to trap him, spinning like a propeller as he aimed it right at the Barate's fin. Time for me to end this, right now. Gum gum, he cried out eagerly. Going down, Robin said smiling as the two were both screaming, but for different reasons. Giant hammer. And with that, Luffy slammed Krieg's head into the fin, shattering what was left of it, where Krieg finally lost and backed out. Now it's over, Sanji grinned just as Luffy hit the water and the memory disappeared so that they were back among the dark trees once again. What happened? Chopper cried out looking around. Relax, Sanji said, after the old geezer told me that devil fruit users can't swim, I fished Luffy out before he drowned and Jin took Krieg and the others and left. Wait, so he did make it? Nami asked pleasantly surprised. Hard to say, Sanji sighed, lighting up another cigarette. He was still really sick. But he said that he was going to spend what was left of his time here fighting for his dream of going to the Grand Line. The Grand Line? Usopp asked in surprise. I can't say for sure, Sanji answered. But he said that it had become his dream. I have no idea to what happened to him, or if he is even still alive. But we gave him a boat and they left in. After we hauled Luffy inside and treated his injuries, he pretty much slept everything off. What a fight though, Usopp said in admiration. No matter what happened, he just kept getting back up to fight. That was just awesome. Yeah, Chopper cheered on eagerly. But I'm going to talk to him about this. If he thinks that he can still get up to fight after taking all those bombs, he'll live, Zoro smirked. So is this all we see about you, Crud Cook? Would you watch it? Sanji snapped back when the memory came back and they were all standing in a room, still on the Baratie. Luffy was sitting up in bed, looking around sleepily and realized that he wasn't alone. Sanji was sitting in the window, looking out at the sea. Luffy blinked a few times, and they could see that he had several bandages wrapped in the places where he pulled the spikes out as he put his hand on his head and screamed out in panic. My hat. Where's my hat? It's right there. Calm down, Sanji said loudly. Luffy's hat was sitting on a shelf with things like cigarettes and even a picture of Sanji and Zeph when they first opened the restaurant. Is that you, Sanji? Robin asked, as she looked over to get a look at the picture. Weren't you cute? Aw, you really think so, Robin dear? He swooned, his eyes like hearts as he looked at her hopefully. Don't take it like that, idiot, Nami warned him as Luffy sighed in relief and put it happily on his head. Have a good nap, past Sanji asked as Luffy looked around the room. Hey, those pirates, Luffy asked in confusion, and it was clear he was trying to figure out how he got here. Well, I can tell that a lot's happened since he blacked out when he hit the water, Robin chuckled softly. They're gone now, memory, Sanji answered, all thanks to you. Me? He asked in surprise. Yeah, and Jin asked me to tell you that he said he'll see you on the Grand Line, past Sanji said, looking back out at the ocean. He did? Luffy asked in surprise. To you? No, to you, Sanji yelled back as he climbed out the window to the balcony and walked to the railing. He really is so slow, why else would I tell him that? Current, Sanji asked wearily as he followed his past self to stand with him. He never thought he'd be looking out from this window again. There was silence all around them for a moment before Luffy reminded him that he didn't have to be chore boy anymore since he got Krieg out of here. That's the deal, memory, Sanji confirmed for him. Hey, I was wondering. Luffy said, but Sanji already guessed what he was gonna say and beat him by telling him that his answer was still no, he wasn't going to become a pirate. That he was going to stay here at the Baratie until Zeph acknowledged him as a real cook. Was it really that important to you for Chef Zeph to tell you that? Chopper asked. I think that everyone wants to hear from someone that they have come a long way, Sanji answered him softly. Especially, if that person is the one who taught you everything you know and that your hard work's paid off. That you don't have to be considered an apprentice anymore. Chopper thought that over and realized that he was right. He remembered how hard he worked with Doctorine, how she only ever praised him once during the long years that he worked with her. He never noticed it before, but he never forgot the words she said, when she told him that he had done a good job. He supposed he could understand what Sanji was saying here. So if Zeph told you that you were an amazing cook, you would have left like that? Usopp asked. Sanji didn't answer, he just gazed ahead, lost in thoughts. Luffy sighed, his eyes overshadowed as he told him that he finally gave up. However, his words and his actions didn't match. He stretched his arm out to grab hold of past Sanji's collar and he was gasping at him to let go. He never could take no for an answer. Nami sighed with a smile. I don't think it'll take anything less than a beating to get him to listen. And even then, that doesn't work, Sanji sighed. His past self was telling Luffy that he couldn't leave just yet, but that he did promise himself that one day he would go to the Grand Line. Luffy beamed as he stretched out to join him on the balcony. Well, let's go right now, he said. Yeah, why not? Asked Chopper eagerly. It just isn't the right time. Not yet, he said, and watching it now, current Sanji realized just how pathetic that sounded. They continued to look out at the sea for a moment before his memory self said, "There's one place," and without another word, he turned back to Luffy and asked, his face suddenly lighting up with exhilaration as he asked, "Say, have you ever heard of All Blue?" "No," Luffy answered bluntly. "You've got to be kidding me." Past Sanji asked, still never losing his smile. "That sea is a miracle." Luffy's eyes widened as he went on and on about his dream of one day seeing the All Blue. In the All Blue there are fish from the East Blue, the West Blue, the North Blue, and the South Blue, he said breathlessly. That one stretch of ocean has it all. To us cooks it's a culinary dream come true. A place that fantastic has got to be on the Grand Line somewhere, right? Wow, I don't think I've seen you this happy when you aren't looking a pretty girl, Usopp said in surprise. Oh, I almost missed him up there, Brook said, looking up to the higher balconies, and spotting someone up there. Who? Asked Nami, glancing up as well, and they all looked to see that Zeph was there watching them. You mean that old geezer was listening in the whole time? Sanji roared out furiously. But Zeph was watching the whole thing with a small smile on his face, as if dreaming of the All Blue himself. Sanji was blushing a little at that. He didn't know what made him tell Luffy about his dream. Perhaps it was because he knew that Luffy wouldn't laugh at him or tell him that it was impossible. After all, both of their dreams were considered to be unattainable. He didn't understand before this moment. But he did now. Luffy didn't let his dreams die here, and he wasn't gonna let his disappear either. He just smiled as he watched his past self continue on for some time about his dreams of seeing the All Blue and what he would make once he got there. When Patty screamed out that lunch was served, the two decided to go down and get some as well. But they came before a surprising incident. First, there wasn't any seating left and he and Luffy were forced to sit on the floor. What's wrong? Zoro teased, you afraid to wrinkle your suit? You shut up. Sanji yelled at him. This was a restaurant for crying out loud and there wasn't any seats left. There was something up. But as they continued watching it got nasty when all the chefs kept going on about how they hated his food. It ended with a big fight with Zeph and Sanji before he went charging out. That's cold, Frankie said, knowing how sensitive that Sanji was about his cooking skills. Just one insult was enough to earn a hard ass kicking from him. But present-day Sanji didn't say a word here. The only one who didn't have something to say about Sanji's cooking was Luffy, who was gulping it all down. What's all the fuss about? He asked, ladling himself more. This soup's totally awesome. All of us know the soup is good, Zeph said, and Luffy looked up in surprise, as did the rest of the Straw Hats. Sanji in particular was listening hard to this part. He didn't hear it the first time and what he said next meant more to him than treasure. I know he's an outstanding chef. Everyone here on the Baratie does, Zeph said, and Sanji felt a little watery-eyed at that. Not a single one of the other cooks disagreed, all of them nodding the same way and told him what they all thought. But I don't get it, Chopper said in confusion, they all said. They're a bunch of dumbasses, Sanji answered for him as Zeph went on. But the thick-skulled idiot wouldn't listen to us if we tried to reason with him, he said, and Zoro smirked at that part. Luffy continued to enjoy the soup when Zeph made a surprising request. Hey, listen, you were saying that you needed a cook for your ship, right? Well, this isn't something I wanna be asking anyone, but would you mind taking that little brat along with ya? Take him to the Grand Line. He smiled, that would be best for him. The Grand Line is his dream. Sanji smiled at that. It sure sounds like he really cares a lot about you, Sanji-san, Brook told him softly. He wanted what was best for you. Yeah, I guess I know better than anyone that the old fossil's got a soft side in him somewhere, he admitted, his face mostly hidden by his bangs again. He knew this part, it was here that he remembered listening in. He had gone back to smash their heads in, letting them all know that he wasn't going to be pushed around and take trash talking his food without a fight. But once he heard all this, geez boss, you sure made us put on a hell of a show, Patty said, looking close to laughing. Oh man, Carne laughed, I was worried he was gonna figure it out cause of your bad acting. It was amazing acting, Chopper said softly. Patty laughed, come on, your acting was way worse than mine. Well, Nami admitted, I suppose heard a lot worse actors. I think they'd been practicing that for years, Sanji confessed, and it was still bad. You seem to believe it, Zoro smirked and Sanji responded with another kick, which he blocked with a sword. Would you get off my back? He yelled. But their fight was interrupted when Luffy said something that made them all almost fall over, even the Straw Hats. No way. What? Usopp yelled in a stunned voice. Now that's a surprise, Robin said smiling. You mean that he didn't want you to come along anymore? Chopper asked but Sanji shook his head. But earlier you mentioned you needed a cook for your ship. Zeph said loudly, and he was now sounding angry. Just what are you trying to say? That he's suddenly not good enough for you. That's sweet, Nami said smiling and Sanji felt a warm feeling go through him at that. It was the first time that Zeph had ever even sounded like he defended his cooking skills. Oh, he's good, Luffy admitted, turning back to his food, and I'd love it if he joined my crew and came with us. He swallowed and finished, but it seems like he really wants to stay here and cook with all of you guys. You can ask me all you want but I'm just not gonna take him. Zoro sighed. And to think that you did come alone, just when we could have found ourselves a real cook. You shut up. Sanji yelled at him, at least I didn't need to be bribed into joining. OR threatened to kill anyone. Zoro's face suddenly turned angry. What did you say? Come on, Frankie said, getting between them both. Do you guys have to go into this every few minutes? Why not? Demanded Sanji hotly. Look, Robin interrupted, turning their attention back to the scene. So you're saying you can't agree to it unless he tells you himself, Zeph said, playing with his mustache. Is that right? That's right, Luffy said before he held out his plate and asked for more food. Zeph thought it over before he said, well, I suppose that's fair enough. But who knows if that hard-headed little brat will ever agree to join up with ya. Yeah, Patty added, once that guy makes up his mind there's nothing anybody can do to change it. What made you decide to come? Usopp asked him as Frankie succeeded in getting Sanji and Zoro apart. Well, Sanji said to him, trying to compose himself, part of the answer is about to coming crashing through that door. And no sooner did he said that when something came with a crash right through the wall. What the hell? Frankie yelled out as Usopp and Chopper both scrambled out of the way. That's kinda what was going through my mind too, Sanji confessed. Through the dust they saw that it was a large pan shark with Yosaku hanging from his mouth, and with past Sanji underneath them. Now there's something you don't see every day, Nami said, a large sweat drop over her head. So that's what happened to him, Zoro said in surprise. He wondered how Yosaku made it back to get Luffy. Yeah, Usopp said thinking back. Once they realized where you were heading Nami, Yosaku said he was going to go back and get Luffy to help. How'd he get in that thing's mouth? Brook asked fascinated and the two just shrugged. He just jumped overboard and disappeared, Zoro said shaking his head. Man, I'd love to hear what happened there. After they pulled Yosaku out of the thing's mouth, it went back to the water and took off as they heard what happened. They had Yosaku with a blanket and he explained that though they weren't able to catch up to Nami, they figured out where she was heading. But Yosaku also added that he came back here to get Luffy, explaining that they needed his help because the place they were going to could mean certain death for them all. Nami-san, Brook asked, but Nami shook her head, silently letting him know that he was soon to find out. She wasn't going to be looking forward to the next few memories. Alright, Luffy said, I don't really get it, but I got it. Memory Sanji was leaning against the railing outside as the two got up and walked past, going to get ready to leave. But as soon as Luffy walked past him, he said to wait. Your dream is foolish, he said when Luffy did stop to listen, but then again, so is mine. Luffy didn't look at him as Sanji looked up to the sky. Now's as good a time as any. Why not start my quest right now? So this is? Brook asked him as Sanji nodded, smiling a little. Yeah, he confessed, I was through dreaming. I was finally ready to leave. So I guess that their act worked. Frankie asked with a laugh. Not quite, he answered with his eyes rolling. Sanji? Luffy asked, turning his head slightly. Pushing himself off the banister memory Sanji looked at him and said, I'll be joining your little crew on your journey to be king of the pirates. I still don't get what I was thinking here, he laughed. I must have been crazy joining such a crazy crew. And this is where you officially join. Chopper cried out happily. Luffy turned to stare at him as Sanji finished up, you hear me? I wanna be the cook on your ship. They sized each other up as he finished, alright. What a say. A big grin appeared on his face and he screamed out, yeah. Of course. He and Yosaku were both jumping around, dancing and singing happily as Sanji looked up at the cooks. Are you guys happy now or what? He asked grumpily, but he was smirking when he saw their sour expressions. Sorry, really. I'll leave now. Patty snorted and said that he wanted to throw him out himself for up and abandoning them. I'm especially sorry for making the lot of you resort to bad acting, past Sanji told him. So you did know, Usopp said in revelation. Actually, Sanji confessed, I overheard some of the things they said in here. Hey wait, Patty yelled, how'd you know? You could have just let them believe that their act did the trick, Robin offered with a giggle. Sorry, but I just couldn't stand any more of that crud bad acting, he laughed, if you wanna call it acting in the first place. I heard everything, you bunch of jerks, past Sanji answered, now turning to glare at Zeph. Was stomping on my pride the best plan you could come up with? Was it, you damn geezer? Every little thing has to be a fight with you. Patty yelled, holding up a fist, I'm sick and tired of it. Bring it on. You were getting ready to leave, but you weren't going to go without one more argument. Nami asked him knowingly. Just a little something to remember me by, he offered brightly. But Zeph was holding Patty back as he looked to Sanji. I have never liked children. As a matter of fact, I hate children. There wasn't a day past that I didn't regret letting a useless little brat like you live, Sanji. Harsh, Brook winced. Oh, I'm sure that he didn't mean that, Robin answered. I guess that this was just his way of saying that he was glad he was finally leaving or something like that. I guess so, current Sanji said, and besides, if he didn't save me, he wouldn't have had me to kick around for all these years. What fun would he have had here? Fine by me, you rotten old man, past Sanji smirked back, enjoy the rest of your miserable life. You can really feel the love here, Zoro said, rolling his eye. Now, we all ways of letting others know we care, Sanji said as he watched himself leave with Luffy and Yosaku. He told them that he was going to get his stuff and that he would meet up with them later. And the next few memories were of them following Luffy around and packing up food, mostly meat, and putting it all on a nice boat that they were going to take it to find the others. They were all a little surprised when Zeph had offered him his logbook, however. And he wasn't going to give it to someone who was threatening to take his restaurant, Brook said softly. Because he knew that Luffy would never abuse what was written in it, Sanji told him simply. But none of them were the least bit surprised when Luffy had refused, and caused Zeph to smirk again and left. Soon, with everyone on board, Luffy and Yosaku were waiting with all the other cooks outside on the fins, that was patched together rather sloppily. So this is where you're officially leaving? Nami asked and Sanji merely nodded as they all waited for his past self to appear. What was taking you so long, crud cook? Zoro asked. I was just taking one last look around, he snapped back. Finally, he appeared in the doorway with his knives in his case and a sack over his shoulder. He stood there for a minute in the doorway, as if realizing that this was all for real, he slowly walked forward. But Patty and Carne jumped him, ready to give him a beating, of course with 2 kicks, Sanji took them out. Really guys, that was just dumb, a chef said to them as they bled on the deck. In memory Sanji continued on as if no one interrupted him. Couldn't have said that better myself, Nami said exasperatedly as the others laughed. Just what was the point of that? Their way of sending him off, suggested Zoro. It was silent after that as memory Sanji walked with all the cooks on either side of him, only the sounds of his footsteps in the waves could be heard. It was as if he was about to leave for a dangerous war and might never come back. Though, thinking about it, that wasn't impossible. He reached the boat and said, without ever looking back, let's get going. You don't need to say goodbye. Luffy asked, a little surprised. But Sanji smiled as he said it was fine, and was about to get in when Zeph called out behind him. Sanji, he said from the upper balcony, take care of yourself, okay? Both Sanjis were standing there frozen at those words. Even after all this time, those words seemed to have echoed inside him. Though those simple words wouldn't mean much to others, to Sanji, those words meant so much. Zeph, a man who usually belittled him one way or another, asked him to take care of himself. He was fighting the tears all over again, but his past self was quickly breaking down as an understanding smile appeared on Luffy's face. Sanji-san, Brook asked softly, but past Sanji couldn't hold it in anymore. Chef Zeefffffff. He screamed out, and to their astonishment he spun around and fell to his knees, his forehead touching the Barati's deck. He was so completely moved by what Zeph said, that he just couldn't hold it in. Thanks you geezer. I'll never forget your kindness. I owe my life to you, old man, so thank you. They were all looking from past to present Sanji. Never once had they seen him break down like this, if you don't count seeing the mermaids. So that's what he meant when Luffy said you were crying harder at Fishman Island than when you left, Usopp said, remembering Sanji's reaction to arriving at Mermaid Cove. I had to say it, Sanji said softly. Thanks to him, I'm alive and kicking. What a shame, Zoro added softly, remembering that Sanji said those words to him earlier. But now tears had appeared in Zeph's eyes. Soon all the other chefs were crying as well, saying how much they were gonna miss him. There wasn't a dry eye around, and Sanji in the memory was smiling through his tears. Damn words, Zeph said, his eyes bloodshot as he rubbed them. Real men should part without a word, let alone tears. But this warmed the heart and soul, Brook said happily as they watched them all try and mop up their feelings, and Sanji finally stepped onto the boat. Let's go. Set sail. Luffy hollered and they pushed off, with Sanji waving to them all, still crying the whole way. I will see you again. He promised them. I'll come back someday. The whole time the chefs waved him off, yelling they wished him good luck and that they would miss him. Current Sanji couldn't hide back his tears as he watched. He promised that he would go back someday, once he found the All Blue, and he will. Once he fulfilled his dream, he would return and show them just how far he's come since then. With an emotional Bharati behind, they watched the three head off as the chefs waving him off even after he was out of their sights. Luffy. Some time had passed since the Straw Hats were forced back out into the open air, but the whole time Luffy had been sitting beside Sabo and Ace as he talked eagerly about all the adventures that he went on since he left home. He told them all about how they went over mountains, flew to Sky Island, invaded Eni's lobby, fighting zombies at Thriller Bark, and anything else he could think of. And we just got back from visiting Jinbei, Hachi, and Kami on Fishman Island. He finished excitedly, it was so cool going down there. It was one heck of an adventure just getting there. His two brothers just sat there and listened, both had smiles on their faces as Luffy went into more stories about all the people he's met and, of course, his crew. But he finally noticed something different. Sabo. He asked, how could you're older than me now? Sabo laughed. Finally noticed. He asked brightly. I was beginning to wonder if you'd figure it out, I'm this age because I wanted to be. Come on, wouldn't it be strange to speak to your older brother if you were taller than? Luffy thought it over before said, oh, I get it. No you don't, Ace finished and they all laughed. I really want you both to meet my crew. Luffy said eagerly, excitement going throughout his whole body at the thought. Ace, you already met a lot of them, but I want you to meet Robin, Frankie, and Brook now. And Sabo, you need to see them all. The two shared a very strange look with each other and Luffy blinked. What, you don't want to meet them? We wish we could, Sabo said, but I'm afraid that things aren't that simple. What do you mean? Luffy asked confused as his brothers smirked wider at him. Well, that's hard to explain, Ace said still grinning, and I don't think that we have time to talk about it. After all, we're gonna have to send you back soon. Not yet, Luffy cried out desperately. We only just got to see each other again. And you want me to go? It's for the best Luffy, Sabo answered him. You can't stay here with us forever. Right now, your crew's trying to find you. Luffy blinked as it all came back to him. Oh, right, they were sleeping when I was brought here. You're saying they're okay? Yes, Ace answered, they're lost on the island right now, they're doing a job for me. So until they get it done, you get to stay here. But as soon as they're finished, you have to go back. But, Luffy whined but Ace silenced him with a look. None of that now, he said and Luffy sighed. Can't you both come with me? He asked. Both brothers shook their heads. We already talked about that Luffy, Ace said firmly and Luffy turned sad. I know, he answered, but it doesn't mean that I have to like it. We know, Sabo sighed, as he looked up to their old hideout. But there's something that we can do to help make you feel better. What? Luffy asked in surprise. It's been years since you and I had a real fight, Ace said with a wicked grin. How about we throw down right now? Luffy blinked in surprise. You and me, fight. One last fight, just you and me, Ace grinned as Sabo smirked between them. You had 2 years of training haven't you? I want to see just how far you've come. Let's see which one of us is stronger. You once said that you would one day surpass even me, right? He stood up, his arms folded as he asked, how about we prove it once and for all? Luffy blinked at him. You mean it? He asked, as if afraid he heard wrong. You did say that, Sabo agreed. You said that one day you will be stronger than both of us, right? I think it's about time you prove it. This will be the last fight that we ever have, Ace said decidedly. We will settle it here and no matter the outcome, it will be final. We will get to see who's the strongest. You up to it? Luffy couldn't believe his ears. This was what he wanted more than anything. A wide grin appeared on his face. You're on.